About 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, I was in my early 20s and I was living the I'm gonna be famous someday life. I was never a good student and I was always the class clown. One thing that I always did well as a kid was make my friends laugh. Instead of going to college or getting a job right after high school, I decided I was going to become a stand-up comedian. Spoiler alert, I did not become a famous comedian, which maybe is the best joke of my stand-up career. Instead, I had nearly a decade of bombing on stage, and even worse than that, the most terrifying single-handed experience of my life happened to me. For a little bit of context, doing stand-up is hard and definitely not lucrative when you're not successful. Not to mention, stand-up comedy was not as popular as it is today. To say it is a grind is an understatement. You question your decisions every time you perform until you get that one crowd that laughs at one of your jokes. The high you experience from the crowd laughing and cheering is intoxicating, and I assume that's why comedians constantly keep grinding. Part of the grind is finding gigs that will pay you, or even just let you perform for a couple of minutes. I was fortunate enough to have several open mics in my hometown, but you're not getting paid at an open mic, and a lot of the time you're sharing the stage with all sorts of other talented people and not just comedians. Nothing kills a comedian's momentum like performing after someone who just poured out their soul with life-altering poetry. After a few years of performing at open mics, I decided to try to reach out to club promoters and local comedians who would get booked for actual shows. Most of the time, these shows would be several hours away if I were lucky. Usually, they were even further than that. I did a few shows, and this is where the grind gets real. It's also where my story takes a very terrifying turn. I didn't have very good luck with these traveling shows. I wasn't getting paid, and I was driving 4 or 5 hours across state lines just for 5 minutes of exposure. Not an ideal situation for someone who was broke and barely had any income coming in. One night, I had an amazing opportunity to perform at a show that was being held 5 hours from where I lived. This show was a competition for comedians trying to break into the mainstream. The first place prize was $1,000, but the real prize for me was that several moderately famous comedians were going to be the judges of the show. It was my chance to show actual comedians that I have talent. The worst part for me when I would make all these trips was that I had a garbage car and an old cell phone that was about as reliable as those big 1980s brick cell phones. I would always think to myself that if something happened, I would be stranded. My drives almost always consisted of nothing but farmland and open fields as far as you could see. Because I was a lazy person, I didn't bother to double-check my printed-out MapQuest directions. Instead, I decided to wing it, something I still regret to this day. I was lost. The directions I had did not match where I was. I had been on a backcountry road for some time, and I had no idea if I was even heading in the right direction. Thankfully, I always left for the traveling jobs early just in case I got lost. I may have been lazy, but I know myself well, and getting lost was not uncommon for me. It was still daylight when I started driving through a small town. Honestly, calling it a small town might be a stretch. There were a few beat-up old buildings and houses on a street that was maybe a couple of 100 feet in length. Outside of an old gas station, there were a few individuals who looked less than welcoming. I know that's kind of rude to say they were dirty and mean, but they were rude to me. They didn't look like they were using or anything like that. They just looked like they'd been beaten up by life. I asked where I was and tried asking them if I was on the right track. They were short with me, and after an awkward back-and-forth exchange, they finally told me where I needed to go. According to the rude townspeople, I was still somewhat on the right track. Somehow, I had missed a turn a while back, but if I stayed straight on this road for a while, eventually I would see the road I needed to be on. I thanked them and filled up my tank before I set off again. While I was pumping the gas, I noticed several of the people I had just talked to were staring at me. It was uncomfortable for sure. It was those dead-eyed stares, and it wasn't just one of them. I counted at least 4 of them just staring and standing completely still like a statue. It made me feel all sorts of weird. I finished up and got out of that small town as fast as I could. I started driving and rehearsing my routine to myself. I kept thinking about how ironically funny my conversation with the townspeople was, and I even tried thinking of ways that I could incorporate this experience into my stand-up routine. Not long after leaving the town, a beat-up white pickup truck flew by me going very fast. I didn't think anything of it at the time. When it was around dusk, I had been driving for nearly an hour since I left the town. There was nothing but trees on the left and right sides of the road. I had that gut feeling that I was probably lost. As I continued down the road, I heard a loud sound from underneath my car, and I started losing control of the vehicle. I knew right away what had happened. It was unmistakable. I had somehow gotten a flat tire. I pulled over to inspect the damage. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't just a flat tire. Both of my front tires were completely obliterated. When I leaned over to take a closer look, I noticed that the tires were impaled with several nails. I pulled out my terrible cell phone, and of course, the service was not good. I tried calling a tow truck, but I had no idea where I was or even what road I was on. I hung up the phone. Instead of panicking, I was starting to get angry that I was going to miss the show. I was stupid, and my priorities were elsewhere. I decided to call one of my friends. I described everything that I remembered about the drive, and I told him about the small town with the gas station. He told me he was going to try to look up where I was and that he would call me back. I didn't know if I should just stay put in the car or I should try walking back in the direction of the town. I decided to stay put in the car because now that it was almost completely dark, it was starting to get cold. It was clear now that I wasn't going to make the show. While I was waiting to hear back from my friend, I noticed two bright headlights popping out from the horizon behind me. The headlights stopped moving a good distance from my car and didn't continue in my direction. The car was close enough that the lights were bright and annoying, but far enough away that I could not tell what kind of car it was. I don't know if it was a cop or some local trying to call the police to report a vehicle on the side of the road. If you're wondering why I didn't just call the police, it's because I was driving a car that was not inspected or properly insured at the time, and I wasn't trying to get that ticket in another state. Several minutes went by, and the car never moved. It just stayed parked a good distance behind me, shining those bright lights. After probably a good 5 minutes or so, the bright lights started to get a little closer. The vehicle was slowly moving towards the back of my car. As that was happening, two more lights could be seen in front of me, making their way toward me quickly. The loud vehicle stopped inches from my car. Eventually, the car that was behind me was parked directly behind my car, and I still couldn't tell who it was. While I was trying to adjust my eyes to the bright light in my rearview mirror, I noticed that the car doors from the vehicle in front of me were now open. That's when I noticed it was a white pickup truck, the same beat-up white pickup truck from earlier. Before I could notice anyone coming, I heard a loud bang on the driver's window, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the rude man from the gas station. I started to panic because the man was trying to open my car door. Even though it was locked, he was aggressively pulling on the door. He started to beat on the car window. I wasn't sure how long my window would last before it broke. As this was going on, I noticed one of the other men from the car make his way to the passenger side of my car. He also started to aggressively try to open the door. I was trying to yell at them to stop, but it was like they didn't understand what I was saying. They were just grunting and smashing the car doors. The guy at the driver's side door stopped trying to break in for a moment and instead just stood there, staring directly at me. It was just like those vacant stares from the gas station earlier. I can't even begin to explain how horrible that moment was. With no notice at all, he just started screaming, and it wasn't just a normal scream. He was howling and screaming at the top of his lungs. I don't know what came over me at that moment, but I decided that the best course of action was for me to just try and get out of the car and run. I pushed open the door as hard as I could, and thankfully, it was enough force to knock the man over. I ran as fast as I could into the woods, but instead of running blindly into the pitch-black forest, I decided to dive to the ground only several feet into the woods. I hoped that these guys would think I ran deeper into the woods, and thankfully, that's exactly what happened. Moments later, I heard footsteps of several people running by me. When I was sure I heard all of them run by, I quietly got up and ran back to my car. Surprisingly, my backpack and cell phone were still in the car. I grabbed them, stayed low, and just ran as fast as I could down the road. The entire time I was running, I expected them to jump out of the woods, but I never saw them again. About half an hour later, I was able to flag down a passing car. The woman was uncharacteristically kind. I don't know if I would have been so nice and trusting of a screaming man in the middle of nowhere. She called the authorities and even let me sit in her car until the police showed up. I told the cops everything, but as you might expect, there really wasn't anything they could do. There was no evidence of anything malicious other than some small dents in the car door, and given the condition of my car, the cops didn't really believe the dents were caused by them. I also received a couple of tickets for my car, which is just the icing on the cake for this story. I never found out why those people targeted me or what they wanted with me. Clearly, they were not trying to help. All things considered, I'm lucky that I'm here telling the story. All I can say is just be careful out there. You never know what people are capable of, especially when no one's around to witness. I feel like I'm still not right from what happened to my two friends and I last summer. What was supposed to be an awesome girls' road trip turned into a nightmare that I'm not sure I'll ever fully get over. For a little bit of context, I'm not a spontaneous person. I'm one of those people who has to have everything planned very far in advance, and even then, every little detail needs to be accounted for. It's annoying for some, but it's just how I operate. In late June, I broke up with my boyfriend, who I had been dating for 5 years at that point. It was a messy breakup. One of the things that got me through the breakup was that my friend Sarah had just dumped her boyfriend as well. Having someone to spend time with who was also going through the same situation was such a blessing. Strangely, our bonding through misery and grief helped us both to move on. A few weeks after the breakup, our friend Alyssa invited Sarah and I on this cross-country trip she was going to be taking. Ordinarily, I would never do something like that. The anxiety alone would be enough for me to melt away. But for some reason, this time it sounded like a fun girls' trip. All three of us are fortunate enough to have jobs where we can take time off for a trip like this. Alyssa basically lives on the road. She's always traveling and finding these insane places all over the country. She's the type of woman who will just throw a sleeping bag down in the dirt and sleep under the stars. She's always been such a free spirit and lives for adventure. Sarah and I were much more sheltered. We decided to let Alyssa basically be the captain of our little crew for the trip. She planned it all out, and we were all going to be there for the ride. The first day or so was a little rough for me. I just wasn't used to winging it. But after that, I started really enjoying myself. On the second or third day, we drove by this insane-looking barn. It was definitely abandoned. There was no sign of human life anywhere. The farm looked like it had been completely overgrown by nature. Alyssa was begging us to go inside, but I wasn't feeling it. Alyssa was adamant that clearly nobody lived there. She was obviously correct, but I just couldn't bring myself to trespass. It's also worth noting that I'm just a huge baby. Not wanting to trespass was my excuse, but I was actually scared of someone squatting inside the barn. I had listened to one too many true crime podcasts, and I wasn't about to get kidnapped by some insane backwoods farm man. After a few minutes of arguing, Alyssa gave up, and we decided to keep moving on with our trip. The next week of traveling was amazing. We went sightseeing all over the US countryside. Alyssa showed us places and things that were truly incredible. We partied in bars in small towns, slept on a mountain, and met awesome people from all different walks of life. It really was incredible. The only thing that was a little annoying was that throughout the entire trip, Alyssa kept bringing up that barn. It seemed like any time she could work it into the conversation, she did. While we were driving back to civilization, Alyssa basically begged us to get a closer look at the barn. I don't know if it was the trip that made me come out of my shell a little bit, or just days of Alyssa breaking us down, but I was starting to warm up to the idea. I told her that if it looks like nobody had been there in years, then we could check it out. I was confident that most likely nobody had been there, but I just wanted to make sure I put that out in the universe. I wasn't even 100% sure that Alyssa could get us back there, but that girl is amazing sometimes. She knew exactly how to get there. We spotted the barn around 4:30 p.m. We drove the SUV on the dirt and grass and parked it several yards away from the barn. We didn't want to park right on top of the place just in case some scary farm man was living inside. Alyssa was like a kid on Christmas. She ran to the barn door first. It was crazy in that place. I'm pretty sure the vines were holding the building up. It almost sounded like the place was breathing, but I'm pretty sure that was just the integrity of the building slowly falling apart. The weirdest part was all this strange equipment that was still inside the barn. It didn't look like any farm equipment I've ever seen before, but I'm not a farmer, so maybe it was just older stuff. It looked like stuff you would find in a medieval dungeon. After we explored and took a bunch of pictures inside the barn, Alyssa wanted us to check out the farmhouse that was connected. At this point, I was fully invested, so she didn't have any pushback from me. We had to kick down the door because it was somehow warped into the frame and it wasn't opening. Inside, it was both creepy and sad. It was definitely empty and abandoned. It's not like the previous owner had furniture and stuff like that inside. It was empty, other than a small green table and a green wooden chair. What was sad was that I couldn't stop thinking about the people who had most likely lived there before. I mean, it was a farm at one point. Somebody had to have lived there before, and now it's just forgotten by history. We explored the house, and I imagined it could have been a cute little house at one point. After a while of just hanging out and talking inside the small house, Alyssa and Sarah both made a crazy suggestion. They suggested that we stay inside the farmhouse that night. Obviously, this seems like it would be a horrible idea, but at that moment, it seemed wild and exciting, and at this point of the trip, I was here for it. We'd been hanging out there so long already that I didn't realize it was almost 7 p.m. We went back to the car and grabbed our stuff. We ate some subs from the cooler, then drank a few beers and talked about the trip some more. Around 9, we started setting up our sleeping bags. We all set our alarms for 6 a.m. so we could get right on the road in the morning. We were all exhausted at this point, so it didn't take us long to pass out. I'm a light sleeper, so I was tossing and turning for a while and going in and out of consciousness. I must have finally fallen asleep briefly, because around 3 a.m., something strange woke me up. I swear, I thought I heard someone make a shush sound. I rose from the sleeping bag and scanned the room the best I could with only the moonlight faintly shining through the vines on the window. I didn't see or hear anything. My best guess was that either Alyssa or Sarah had just been snoring or something. I laid back down and shut my eyes. Almost instantly, I jumped up because there was a loud bang at the door. It was like someone crashed into the door. And remember, we had to break down the door, so it was basically just propped up against the door frame. If this really was a person, they could easily just push down the door. The bang on the door was loud enough that it woke up Alyssa and Sarah. Both were just as startled as I was. We all sat there frozen, basically holding our breaths, listening for another sound. Instead of a loud bang, we started to hear these soft and delicate taps coming from the window, which was on the other side of the room. Then the banging on the door started again. This wasn't the wind or the creaky barn. This was for sure people. People who clearly knew we were inside. We all huddled up together and panicked. It's easy to say what you would do in this situation, but I promise you, you would probably be paralyzed as well. The banging on the door stopped, and then the door was pushed open. 2 skinny men and 1 skinny woman walked inside. I would say all of them were maybe late 30s. They didn't rush in or do anything insane. Instead, they just slowly walked in and stood in front of us. Somehow, just walking in normally like that was scarier. Sarah started to scream, and in response to Sarah's screaming, one of the men started screaming. It was like he was mirroring her scream. The woman of the group started to shush Sarah. The man in the middle of the group started to gesture with his hands, almost like a mime. I didn't even realize until that moment that all 3 of them were holding a weird mask that they put on after the man was done gesturing. The masks were so weird. I know that's vague, but I've never quite seen masks like this before. The guy in the middle put on a mask that was just a giant purple cube. That's it. No face or anything, just a purple cube. The other man, the one who was screaming, put on a mask that kind of looked like a homemade Batman mask that was made of cardboard. Then the woman put on what looked like a medical mask with plastic icicles you would hang up on the holidays hanging on each side of the mask, almost like tusks. They slowly started creeping closer to us, and the more we panicked, the louder and more irritated they became. As we screamed, they started to scream as well. The woman grabbed my shoulders, and because she was so skinny, I was able to push her down. The distraction caused the 2 men to look at the woman. The guy with the purple cube mask shouted that I was going to pay for that. Sarah had a small can of pepper spray on her keychain and started spraying in the direction of the masked people. It gave us enough of a window to run by them. The woman grabbed my ankle as we ran, but I was able to free myself quickly. As I was running away, I looked back and saw the woman reaching behind her in her waistband. I ran to the car as fast as I could. I did not want to wait and find out what she was reaching for. We could still hear them screaming from inside the farmhouse. They didn't chase us for some reason. I remember my vision being a little messed up as well from the spray that must have just been in the air as we ran out of the house. We drove away as fast as we could and made it back home in record time. We didn't actually report this to the police because we figured we're the ones that technically trespassed. Maybe those were the owners, even though I seriously doubt that. One of the scariest parts of this whole ordeal, for me at least, is that we have no idea where those people came from. They just suddenly appeared in the middle of the night. We explored that entire barn that afternoon, and there was no sign of life. No food, no footsteps, no footprints in the dust, no car, nothing. These deranged, mask-wearing lunatics just showed up out of nowhere with the sole purpose of harming us in some way. I'm still not over the mental scars from that trip. I'm happy I got that girls' trip out of my system, but I'm good if I never go on another cross-country trip again. I'll settle for a nice staycation next time. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take a road trip across the US. This trip was supposed to be important and special because it was when I planned to propose to my now wife. Unfortunately, that's not the only reason the trip is memorable. One of the happiest memories of my life is also plagued by something that nearly ended both of our lives. This is the first time I'm trying to write this story instead of just telling it verbally, and probably the first time I've written anything since high school. I apologize if it's not the greatest literary work of art you've ever heard. For a little bit of backstory, I have a truck with a large cargo bed. It was more than big enough for her and I to lie down on the air mattress in the bed of the truck. We spent days hiking across the country and sleeping in designated areas in the back of my truck. I had camped a few times as a kid with my family, and I always hated setting up tents and sleeping on the ground. Sleeping in the comfort of my truck felt like a hybrid version of camping, and I was here for it. We both love the outdoors, but we'd be the first to admit that we're not the most nature-savvy people. Every night on the trip was beautiful. We were lucky when it came to the weather. Every night we would fall asleep staring at the sky, and let me just tell you, if you've never gazed at the stars in the wilderness, you need to change that right now. One of the few downfalls of the trip is that my girlfriend was the lightest of light sleepers. Every sound woke her up. We were out in nature, so that means every gust of wind, every bird sound, every tree rustling caused her to wake up. I would always offer her something to help her sleep, but she would always deny it. She said it would make her wake up groggy. Apparently more groggy than being half asleep all night. But it wasn't being a light sleeper that kept her awake on this trip. She has a crippling fear of bears. Ever since one of her coworkers told her that her family was attacked by bears on a camping trip, my girlfriend has been on high alert. Every noise she heard on the trip, she assumed was a bear. Now with the backstory out of the way, I'll share what was almost the last night on Earth for my girlfriend and I. About 3/4 of the way through the trip, I proposed, and she said yes. It was one of the happiest days of my life. With the stress of proposing out of the way, I slept like a baby that night. That next morning, she was the most tired she'd been on the entire trip. When I asked her if she was scared of the noises, she kind of paused and didn't answer right away, which is weird behavior for her. She then went on to tell me that she woke up in the middle of the night because she swore she could hear someone walking on the outside of the truck. She stayed lying down, so she didn't see anyone, but she was convinced someone was walking just outside the truck bed. Every time she tried to sleep, she could hear the sounds of walking, and she was sure she even heard mumbling or talking at some point. I did believe her. Well, I believe that's what she thought she heard. I wasn't dismissive, but I was pretty sure we weren't being stalked or whatever she thought. Before we left in the morning, she gasped outside the truck. When I ran over, she pointed out what looked like a small footprint in the dirt next to the truck. I was probably being ignorant, but I thought it was a stretch to call it a footprint. I asked if it could have possibly been her footprint, and she instantly protested. I didn't argue with her because I could tell she was still freaked out. I made sure I checked my truck before we left and confirmed we didn't have a secret passenger. I did find in the backseat of my truck that my planner was on the seat, and it was open to the page where I had a list of places we were going to stop each night. But I didn't think anything about it. I figured she was looking at it beforehand, or it's possible that I could have left it there. I put it back in my bag, got ourselves ready, and we hit the road. It took a little while for her to get out of her morning fog, but after a large coffee, she was feeling like herself again and didn't bring up the previous night again. We spent the next day just being obnoxiously in love as we hiked through the mountains. Night was approaching, so we set up our little camp nook in the truck bed. I could tell she was a little more uneasy tonight than she had been any other night. It wasn't the bears that were freaking her out. It was the possibility of another person outside the truck. I told her we could sleep inside the locked truck, or even find a hotel if she wanted to, but she insisted that we stay in the truck bed since it was our last night in the wilderness. I decided to stay awake on this night and make sure she fell asleep. It took her a while, but she finally passed out around midnight. I even dug out my old portable DVD player from high school and threw on an old season of Family Guy I had, just to get her mind off the silence of the night. The once beautiful silence was now something she was afraid of, even though she would never admit that. I shut the DVD off and rolled over, trying to get some sleep. Before I even dozed off, I thought I heard something outside my truck. My first thought was a baby bear because it sounded bigger than a raccoon or coyote. I thought it was imperative not to wake her up and cause alarm. Slowly and quietly, I crawled to the wall of the truck bed and peered over the edge. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone was walking around the front of the truck, a smaller figure with a hood on, and they were mumbling something to themselves. I quickly fell back into the truck bed, since they didn't see me because they were walking in the opposite direction. I didn't know if I should wake her up or not. I thought that would make too much noise, and right now, my main goal was to make as little noise as possible. I thought about trying to tackle the walking person, since they looked a lot smaller than me, but I didn't know if they had a weapon or if someone else was hiding nearby to jump me as soon as I made a move. Keeping my fiancée safe was #1 priority. I was listening intently as the figure walked outside, and I was able to tell that they were walking outside the truck, and they made their way around the truck and walked by the foot of the truck bed. I tried to angle my head to get a look at the person. I couldn't see the face, but I could tell it was a woman. I could see the blonde hair coming out from the bottom of the hood, and I could clearly hear mumbling at this point, and the voice was unmistakably of a woman. I planned to jump out and confront the woman the next time she passed in front of the truck bed. I was somewhat relieved that my fiancée was asleep for all this. I waited several seconds, but she never made her way back to the truck bed. I leaned over the edge of the truck again, and I didn't see her on my side of the truck or the front of the truck. That means she either fled into the woods or was on the other side of the truck that I couldn't see. As fast as I could, I took out my cell phone and typed into my notes, "Don't make a sound. Someone is outside the truck. I'll distract them, take the keys, start the truck, and I'll jump back into the bed." I quietly woke up my fiancée and made sure the first thing she saw was me holding my finger to my mouth, telling her not to make a sound as I held up the phone for her to read. As quietly as I could, I handed her the key. I could tell she was confused and terrified, but thankfully, she didn't make a noise. I grabbed my pocket knife and I jumped outside the truck, trying to scare the intruder away, but nobody was outside the truck. I lowered my guard for a second, and I heard my fiancée yell to me if everything was okay. Just as I was about to answer, I felt intense pain in my ankle. The woman was hiding under the truck, and while I was standing there, she smashed my ankle with a thick tree branch. I stumbled to the ground, and while I was picking myself up, she crawled from underneath the truck, screaming erratically, and she threw the thick branch at me. I put my arms up in defense, and she pulled out what I think was a kitchen knife of some kind, and she started to swing it around crazily. I continued backing away from her insane movements, and once I felt like we were far enough away from the truck, I shouted to my fiancée to start the truck now. She jumped from the side of the truck bed and got to the door. The woman immediately diverted her attention and started running for my fiancée. We were far enough away that she was able to start the truck, and she drove off, leaving a massive cloud of dust. The woman started to scream, and it almost sounded like she was crying. She drove a few feet before turning around and driving straight in the direction of this insane woman. The woman dove out of the way. That's when I finally saw her face. It was my ex-girlfriend. She had some problems when we were younger, but the last I knew, she was doing well. I couldn't believe it. Our breakup was not good. I even had to get the law involved at one point because she would just stalk around the outside of my house in the middle of the night and then claim her only crime was that she was still in love with me. This was also 6 years ago at that point. It's not like this was a fresh wound. Once her hood was off, she fell to her knees and I could see her crying. The usual version of myself would have gone over to make sure she was okay, but not anymore. This woman was clearly not well, and I was not going to take any chances. My fiancée drove by me, and I had more than enough time to open the passenger side door and get in. My ex didn't even try to chase us. We just kept driving. As soon as I was able to get service, I called the police and reported everything. Most surprising was that she eventually just went home a few days later and the police confronted her. To her credit, she didn't deny anything. She even told the police that she wanted to be taken in because she's not well. She claimed that she wanted to kill my fiancé. When they asked if she wanted to harm me, she apparently just cried. The last update I received about her was that she was in some type of institution, but I'm not sure how long that was supposed to be. It's been a few years, and nothing of note has happened since. I rarely think about that night, but whenever I hear stories like this, I'm reminded of that horrible experience, and it makes me wonder if I'll ever see her again. My wife looks her up on Facebook and other social media platforms all the time, but as of the time of writing this, she's still MIA, and I hope she remains that way to me for the rest of my life. I'll choose to be anonymous with this because it's pretty embarrassing, and also putting my name out there tied to this is likely a horrible idea. There was a Craigslist ad posted in 2017 by a guy named Jackson. He was advertising free lodging for a girl who would watch over his house and clean, basically an au pair or nanny without having to watch any kids. I'll just be honest that I kinda lost the will to do a lot when I was 21. I had zero relationship with my parents or sister, and I only had a handful of friends who I could trust. I dropped out of college my first year, part of the reason my parents hated me for a while, and I was working a dead-end job at a vape shop. I like to just refer to this period as my attitude era, and when I saw Jackson's Craigslist ad, it really caught my attention. It had like 10 pictures of his house. It looked like a modest middle-class house, slightly old-fashioned honestly, but I was into that. The pictures weren't what got my attention the most though. It was the fact that free living was offered for a nanny-type position. No background check required. I didn't even ask my family or friends their opinion on this post before I just decided to reply to it. Like I said, I wasn't exactly talking to my parents or sister at the time anyway. I texted the number on the ad, and this Jackson guy responded within a few minutes. I expressed interest in the listing and just asked some basic questions. He had an answer to everything that honestly made me feel more interested, but he asked pretty early on in the conversation what my gender was. When I said female, it almost seemed as though his responses got longer. I honestly didn't care. Most people tend to prefer having a female housekeeper or nanny anyway. I was still interested. Anything that got me out of my parents' house. He said he wouldn't be home most of the time during the day, but he wanted to come home to a clean house, and that he also wouldn't mind coming home to a cooked meal from time to time after work. Honestly, I was cool with that too. If it meant free housing, hell yeah, I'll cook some food. Beat standing in the wage cage at the vape shop. Plus, he also said he'd pay for the groceries. It was sounding almost too good to be true. He suggested I come by later that day to check the place out and see if it's a fit. I said okay. A few hours later, I was on my way in my crappy little Civic to the guy's house. It was in a perfectly normal side of town. The block actually seemed pretty calm and peaceful. The neighboring houses had flowers and decorations outside, suggesting the neighbors were normal too. Good start so far. I went to ring the bell, and when the door opened, I was greeted by a man larger and honestly older than I had pictured. I had pictured this regular 45-year-old dad-looking guy. Instead, it was a man maybe 60 years old, 6 feet tall, gray beard, and a little overweight. He greeted me with a smile and went in for a hug even though we had just met, and honestly, the amount that he laughed made me feel pretty at ease. He showed me around the house. It was a 2-story house. The first floor was your basic kitchen, dining room, and living room setup. Then the upstairs was 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. He only showed me the guest room that I'd be using and the bathroom upstairs though. The other doors stayed closed. He said if I ever needed to use the office across the hall, I was welcome to. Down the hall was his room and another room that he didn't explain. I was surprised to hear there was only 1 bathroom. Then there was the basement. He said it was unfinished and that he doesn't use it for anything other than working out and doing laundry. That was the end of the tour. He didn't show me the backyard that day. I told him I wanted the job, and he told me I was hired. 2 days later, I came back with my stuff. I told my parents I got an apartment when they asked where I was going. I didn't explain anything more. The first night there was when I noticed the cameras. No, they weren't hidden. At least, I don't think they were supposed to be. They were just small black cameras mounted up in the corners of the living room and the kitchen. It made perfectly normal sense to me. He was letting basically a stranger live in his house. It wasn't that crazy that he'd want some security. Still, I wish he had mentioned it. That was the first time I felt even slightly weird about the situation. If you can't tell, I really wanted this to work out. That night when I went to bed, I noticed how much noisier the house felt than when we toured it. I could hear the wood floors creaking every once in a while. At one point, I swear I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere downstairs. I checked my phone, and it was around 1:30 in the morning. Again, I came up with a reason for this in my head. When you're laying in silence trying to sleep, you pick up on more sounds than you would when occupied by something during the day. Plus, every old house makes sounds like that. The next morning, he was already gone like he said he would be. He had left a note on the counter with a list of things he wanted done. It was normal stuff. He wanted me to do his laundry, vacuum the floors, wipe down the kitchen, and stuff like that. I tried to just focus on the fact that I wasn't standing behind a vape counter all day anymore. I did his laundry first, then I cleaned the floors and wiped everything down. After that, I went back upstairs and started setting up the bedroom more like my own space. I unpacked my clothes, set up my laptop on a small desk, and put a few personal things around just to make it feel less temporary. I remember thinking maybe this could actually work out. I was actually being positive. After I finished everything, I just relaxed for a while and watched YouTube videos on my laptop. Not hearing my parents yelling downstairs or having one of them burst through my bedroom door barking orders at me was a breath of fresh air. The first week actually went pretty normal. At night when he got home, we would talk a little, like about basic stuff. It never really got deep. He asked about where I grew up, what I wanted to do eventually, stuff like that. I cooked dinner a few nights in a row, and he seemed to appreciate it. I started thinking maybe I just overreacted about the cameras and the weird feeling, but it didn't all stay happy and peachy. One night, I made pasta with chicken and some vegetables. I tried my best, but I'm not some housewife-type star chef. I was some young, angsty goth girl. When he got home, he looked tired and irritated. He took one bite and his whole face changed. He said it tasted bland. I said sorry and offered to add some seasoning or make something else, but he just kind of snapped. He said something like if I was going to be living there for free, the least I could do was learn how to cook something edible. He pushed the plate away and stood up. Then he told me to clean up the mess I made in his kitchen before he walked away toward his bedroom. It caught me completely off guard. It wasn't even just what he said, it was how fast his personality seemed to change. He had seemed so easygoing before that. I cleaned everything up quietly and hoped that he had just had a bad day and nothing more. Everyone has bad days. The next morning, I actually apologized to him. I didn't even really think I did anything wrong, but I wanted to keep things smooth. I told him I was sorry about dinner and I'd try harder. He just laughed like it was nothing. Then he said something that made everything weird. He said maybe I could make it up to him by cleaning the house in my underwear that day. He said it with a smile like it was supposed to be funny. I remember just kind of freezing for a second because I didn't know how to respond. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that, to put it lightly. He just laughed again and said he was joking and told me to relax, and then he went to bed. I remember standing there after he left feeling really unsettled. It was the first time I really thought maybe there was something off about him beyond just being moody. That was the first time I texted one of my close friends about what was going on. I told her about the living situation and what he said. She immediately told me I was insane for staying there. She told me to leave as soon as possible. I didn't want to though. As weird as it was getting, I still felt like I had more control over my life there than I did living with my parents. Going back there felt like failing again. The next Monday, I was leaving the house to go buy groceries with some money he had left for me. As I was driving, a car behind me started laying on the horn. I thought I did something wrong driving, but it kept following me. I pulled over because I started getting scared that something was really wrong. The car pulled up behind me and a girl got out. She looked around my age. She walked up to my window and asked if I was living at that house. When I said yes, she immediately told me I needed to stay away from that man. Apparently, Jackson wasn't even his real name. She said she was the girl who had the same arrangement before me. She told me she eventually realized he had cameras watching her constantly. She said she started noticing he knew things he shouldn't know. She said when she tried to leave, he made it very difficult and kept asking questions about where she was going and when she was coming back. Then she told me one night she woke up and saw him leaving her bedroom. That part made me physically sick. Then she told me the worst part. She said he didn't even have a job. She said he lied about going to work every day, and she eventually realized he was still somewhere inside the house most days. I just sat there trying to process it. Every little weird thing suddenly started making sense. I asked her how I could leave without causing problems. She told me to act completely normal, to start slowly taking important things out so he wouldn't notice. She said when I leave, I should make it look like I was just running errands, and she told me not to confront him and not to let him know I knew anything. After she left, I just sat in my car for a few minutes trying to calm down before going back. When I walked back into the house, it felt completely different. I felt like I was being watched even more than before. That night, I checked the room carefully like she suggested. She was right. After a few minutes of looking around, I noticed something small on the top shelf of the closet. It was pushed away into the corner. When I moved a box, I saw a tiny black lens pointing outward through a small drilled hole. I just slowly put the box back like I didn't see it. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night. I looked at the darkness of the room, wondering what I'd gotten myself into, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't fall asleep that night, because at some random crazy hour in the night, I heard my door creak open, and I flipped to my side and looked at the door. It was Jackson. He noticed me look at him, and he apologized for waking me and closed the door. What the actual was that weirdo planning on doing? I needed to get out of there. The next morning, I started my plan. Every day, I would bring one small bag of stuff to my car. Just normal things and nothing obvious. 3 days later, I left while he was at work, and I never came back. Though if what that girl told me were true, who knows where he actually was? Maybe in the house somewhere. He texted me later asking where I was. I told him I decided to move back home and thanked him for the opportunity. He kept texting asking why and saying I should at least come talk to him in person. I never responded again. About a week later, I noticed something that still bothers me. I got an email notification saying someone had tried to log into one of my old accounts. The login attempt was from the same town his house was in. I changed everything after that. I don't know what his real intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to know. Nothing technically happened to me, but I really believe if I stayed longer, something eventually would have. If you ever see deals like that offering free housing from strangers online, just remember, nothing like that is ever really free. I hired her sometime around the beginning of last fall. I work long hours and live alone in a 2-floor house I bought a couple years ago. It's pretty small and yet still more space than I really need, and I started realizing I was falling behind on keeping it clean. Maybe I needed a girlfriend to keep the place clean at the time. No matter how much I told myself I'd get to cleaning the house, I never seemed to be able to. One night after work, I was just scrolling Craigslist and other similar sites and saw a listing for house cleaning. It was just a simple post saying independent cleaner, cash only, flexible schedule. I figured why not, maybe this was what I needed. I emailed and she responded the next morning. She said she usually did apartments but was fine doing houses too. We agreed on a day she could come by while I was at work. She asked a few normal questions like how big the house was and if there were pets. I told her no pets, relatively small house, and that I lived alone. Looking back, I wish I hadn't mentioned that last part so casually. She came the following Thursday. I met her quickly before leaving for work, and yes, before you ask, I hid anything of value in my lockable closet before leaving. She looked to be maybe 38. She seemed very quiet. She didn't really make eye contact much, but I just figured she was shy. I showed her around quickly, all the rooms I wanted her to clean upstairs and downstairs. I told her she didn't need to worry about my office room. She asked where I usually keep the cleaning supplies, and I showed her the laundry room. She asked if she could come regularly every couple weeks. I said maybe. I wanted to see how this first time went. Before I left, she asked what time I usually got home from work. I told her around 6 or sometimes closer to 7, depending on traffic. At the time, that didn't seem weird since she probably just didn't want to still be there. When I got home that night, the place honestly looked great. The floors and counters were shiny, and everything smelled like cleaning products. I paid her what we agreed, and she left. Nothing seemed wrong. For about a week, everything was good. Then it started. Maybe 6 nights later, I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm not a great sleeper, so this wasn't unusual. What was unusual was I thought I heard a soft thump from downstairs. It sounded like maybe something settling or one of those random house noises you hear at night. Put simply, I ignored it, as most people do when they hear these sounds. A couple nights later, I woke up again, and this time, I heard what sounded like a cabinet door closing. Again, I just assumed I was half asleep and imagining things. I didn't go check. I definitely wasn't going to go walk around a dark house at 3 in the morning over something that was probably nothing. I wish I did. Over the next week, I started noticing small things that felt slightly off, but not enough to really alarm me. One morning, a kitchen cabinet was open a few inches. I figured maybe I left it that way. Another time, a chair at my dining room table seemed pulled out slightly. Again, I assumed I must have done it without thinking. One Saturday morning, I noticed the downstairs bathroom hand towel felt damp. Stuff like that kept happening. Small things that you could always explain away if you want to. Then the nighttime sounds kept happening, always soft enough to explain away. Once it sounded like a single slow footstep, but I convinced myself it was probably the wood floors adjusting. I started sleeping with my bedroom door shut instead of cracked open like I usually did. I didn't really want to admit I was getting uneasy, but I was. One night I woke up and was almost sure I heard movement right outside my bedroom, like pressure being shifted in the floor. I still didn't get up. I just stared at my door, waiting to see if the handle would move. Yes, I was starting to get that paranoid, but nothing happened, and eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning, I felt stupid for even being scared. I checked the house, and everything looked normal. Around this time, I texted the cleaner again about coming back since overall she did a good job, and I figured maybe I was just stressed from work. She came again another weekday while I was at work. It was the same routine. I left the back door unlocked for her. When I got home, everything looked clean again. She asked if I wanted to schedule something regular. I told her maybe once a month. Anything more than that seemed like a waste of money to me. About a week after that second cleaning, I started noticing food seemed to be disappearing slightly faster than it should. Like, I lost my mind one night swearing to myself that there was at least one more yogurt cup in the fridge the previous night, and now it was gone. Bread slices seemed lower than I remembered too. I still was trying to explain these things away though. But one morning, I found a glass in the sink that I was almost positive I hadn't used. I lived alone and was single at the time, so there really wasn't anyone else it could have been. At one point, I wondered if maybe I was doing these things half asleep and not remembering. I even Googled stuff about sleepwalking. Things really changed one night when I woke up and clearly heard slow footsteps downstairs. I know what footsteps sound like compared to house settling noises. These were steps. I grabbed my phone and stopped to listen for a sec. After maybe 10 seconds, I heard what sounded like something lightly bump into a wall. I didn't go downstairs. I know some people might think that sounds stupid, but fear really does make you freeze sometimes instead of act. Or maybe I was picking flight over fight before even confronting the situation. I just stayed in bed, sitting up for half an hour, not hearing anything again, and finally convincing myself it was nothing. And looking back, I look at myself as a coward for that. Morning came, and that day I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I even checked my basement, even though I never heard anything from there. Clear. A few days later, I noticed something that really bothered me. In my kitchen junk drawer, where I keep random things like batteries and takeout menus, I also kept 2 spare house keys on a small ring. One of them was gone. I got goosebumps when I considered the obvious possibility, but I kept telling myself no, it's not possible. I searched the whole house, but I couldn't find it. The cleaner had been alone in the house twice for several hours each time. I started locking my bedroom door at night after that. About 4 nights later, I decided to test something. I left for work like normal, but after driving a few blocks, I circled back and parked on the next street over. I walked back quietly and went in through my back door. I stayed upstairs and just waited. Around 11 in the morning, I heard something. The sound of my front door unlocking. I heard very soft footsteps come inside. I moved to where I could see part of the downstairs through the stair railing. It looked like her, the cleaner. She just walked in like she lived here. She didn't even have cleaning supplies. She went into my kitchen, opened the fridge, took out a drink, and sat at my table. She sat there quietly for a few minutes. Then she walked slowly around my living room looking at things. She picked up a framed photo of me and my brother and just stared at it. Then she walked toward the stairs. I backed up as quietly as I could into my bedroom and shut the door without making any noise. I honestly didn't know what to do. I didn't want her to know I was home yet. After maybe a minute, I heard her walk halfway up the stairs and then stop. I could see her shadow under my door. She just stood there not moving, as if she knew I was at the door. It felt like at least a full minute. With my mind racing, I decided it was now or never to confront her. I flung the door open, and I was not expecting her to actually already be standing mere feet away from the door, already looking at it, and now looking at me. But I quickly realized, now that I had a closer look, it wasn't the same lady. It was another Hispanic lady, yes, but her build, hair, and face were all different. There was something so bone-chilling about her face. She had this blank, nearly angry, hateful look on her face. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. We just stood there for a few seconds, before she slowly turned and walked back down the stairs like nothing happened. I heard my front door open and close a few seconds later. My heart was pounding and I was shaking. I think I was genuinely too nervous and shook to move or say a word. I waited maybe 5 minutes before even moving. Dialing 911 was almost difficult with how shaky my fingers were. The police came and I explained everything. I explained there were 2 different women. I gave them the phone number and email of the cleaning lady and any other info I could provide. The original cleaning lady stopped responding completely after that day. I replaced every lock in the house that same day. Like, literally right after the cops left, I went straight to Ace Hardware. What still bothers me is the officer asking me if I had given anyone else a key, to which I told him no. He just said sometimes people like that don't work alone. I never hired another cleaner again. It's crazy to think that 2008 was almost 20 years ago, but here we are. For anybody who's too young to remember, the early 2000s were sort of like the Wild West for the internet in many ways. Back in 2008, I was in my early 20s, and honestly, I was a bit reckless. I was way too trusting, and I was the king of saying things like, that could never happen to me. I just never really had that sense of urgency or anxiety that others had. That is, until one spring evening, when I experienced for myself firsthand that downright evil individuals really exist in the world. Facebook had just started to blow up, but most people I knew were still rocking MySpace. Social media was a thing, but not like today. We had all heard horror stories about the internet, but nobody I knew actually cared, or more accurately, we were all just incredibly ignorant. I bring all this up because perhaps the most insane thing about the internet at the time was a little website called Craigslist. Now, I know Craigslist is still around, but it's nothing compared to what it was back in the early 2000s. We didn't have websites like Marketplace, so if you wanted something, you went to Craigslist. We could find and purchase anything from small trinkets to vehicles and everything in between. You could even find work or odd jobs for some extra cash. I had heard from friends who used Craigslist all the time that it was the greatest website ever. They swore by it. I never had any interest in visiting the website until my life started to unravel a bit in the spring of 2008. I was living with my girlfriend, and with almost no notice, she dumped me and threw me out of the house. Thankfully, I wasn't living on the street or anything like that because I had friends who would let me crash at their place. I spent the immediate days after the breakup trying to find my own apartment, but it was proving harder than I thought on my $7 an hour salary. One of my friends, whom I had previously mentioned, who swore by Craigslist, told me to check it out for possible houses or even rooms for rent. I may have been reckless and ignorant, but surprisingly, that was a hard pass for me. I don't know why, I just didn't love the idea for some reason. However, I did start looking for furniture and items to eventually fill my place whenever I had a place to fill, since she kept everything after the breakup. At first, it was like a treasure chest of goods. I could finally see why people loved Craigslist. I literally could find anything I needed. I was finding deals left and right. My buddy had a massive garage that he allowed me to store my recently purchased furniture in until I found my own place. One afternoon, I was looking for a love seat or a small couch to store in the garage. I found a post from a guy named Keith who was selling a whole sectional for $45. He had a picture with the posting, and it was a smaller sectional sofa that could fit in most living rooms. Not to mention, it looked like it was in great shape. The price seemed too good to be true, but as I said, I was ignorant, and I just saw a cool couch and a low price tag. I messaged Keith, and to my surprise, he messaged me back almost right away and told me the couch was still available. He seemed friendly and trustworthy. Well, as trustworthy as anyone can be over messaging on the internet. He told me that he had gotten a new job in another state and he was just trying to sell, hence the low price. The reason seemed good enough to me, so we exchanged numbers and set up a time to meet that evening. A meetup that would go on to traumatize me for years and open my eyes to the horror that exists even in our own backyards. I pulled up to the house around 9 p.m. that night, probably a red flag for most, but not for me at the time. He told me he had some other work arrangement, so he couldn't meet until that time. It didn't seem weird to me. The house was dark, and not just because it was dark outside. Everything looked desolate. It was a very run-down street with almost no street lamps. There were several houses on the block, and they were all just as dark and decrepit as Keith's house. I tried calling Keith several times with the number he gave me, but I just kept getting one of those automated responses that the number is no longer in service. Just as I was about to drive away, my phone buzzed. It was a weird number with a different area code. I answered, and I was greeted with a friendly and somewhat unnerving voice. His voice was deep and almost erratic. He called me fella and started apologizing about the phone business. He told me that he broke his phone a little while ago and he was calling me on his work phone. I was definitely a little weirded out, but not scared or uneasy. I was honestly more annoyed than anything. I realize hindsight is 2020, but at the time, when you're in these kinds of situations, your brain is just kind of working differently. I wasn't thinking about the worst. I was thinking about that couch. He told me to meet him around the back side of the residence, and he would unlock the back door for me. I didn't even question it for 1 second. I made my way to the back and couldn't believe that it was still so dark. I figured this guy would turn on some kind of light for me. I got to the back door and just stood there for a moment. I didn't know if he just wanted me to walk inside or if he was coming outside to get me. I decided to call him again on what he said was his work cell. Instead of hearing the ring in my ear, I hear a generic ringtone coming from behind me. Not in the house, but from the bushes in the backyard. I hate to even say this, but this is the first time I finally felt some kind of feeling that something might not be right. Keith ran out from the bushes, waving his ringing flip phone, and with that strange voice, he told me that he was getting rid of some old food and he was just coming out to greet me. He said that he didn't mean to alarm me. He claimed that he liked to feed the squirrels and whatever other animals lived in those bushes. I told him it was fine and that I just wanted to see the couch so I could be on my way. In a cheerful voice, he said, "Of course." He skipped by me, almost stumbling as he passed me. We got to the back door, and it looked like he was struggling to open it. When he told me to meet him in the back, I just assumed that he was going to be opening it from the inside of the house. I didn't expect him to be trying to open the door from the outside. This was the first time I got a good look at Keith. At least as good a look as I could get in the limited light. He was older, but not old. I would say maybe late 50s. He was really skinny and had long white hair that was pulled back in a nasty ponytail. Worst of all, he smelled like a dirty ashtray full of cigarette butts. He pulled away from the door a little bit and asked if I could help him get the door open. He said sometimes the door would stick and he was embarrassed that he couldn't get it open. He told me to just use my shoulder and push the door as hard as I could. At this point, I knew something was wrong, but I was already in the moment and was just kind of going with the flow. I grabbed the doorknob and lowered my shoulder into the door. It didn't stick at all. In fact, as I lowered my shoulder to push it open, someone from the other side opened the door. I had so much momentum now that I lost my balance and fell to the floor. When I hit the ground, I heard Keith yell, "Now!" In the dark room, 2 other people emerged from each side and held me on the ground. I started to squirm, but it didn't matter. One of the guys holding me down was huge. Keith started to kick my face. One of the worst parts of all of this was the sheer darkness of the situation. I couldn't see anything, and that made everything feel so much worse. I could feel my body starting to get weak from Keith kicking me. He told the other guy to grab the tape, and I heard the sound of tape ripping. I couldn't even imagine what they planned on doing. What happened next is probably the closest thing to a miracle that has ever happened to me. During the struggle of me falling and being held down, I accidentally dialed my friend, the friend that I had been living with since the breakup. The sounds of him yelling hello were coming through the phone loud and clear. I decided to yell, "I'm in the back of the house, come and help me." Clearly a bluff. I was alone, but I wasn't sure if these guys knew that. I was hopefully trying to scare them into thinking I had someone else in the car with me. The big guy eased his grip and looked at Keith, who had stopped kicking for a brief second. That second was all I needed. I was able to free myself, and I ran out the door and back to my car. I could hear them chasing me, but I didn't look back. I shut the car door and locked it immediately before starting it. Just as I was peeling away, I saw the big guy clearly for the first time. He was bald and had one of those patchy beards. His eyes were the worst part. They were dark and looked lifeless. He was trying to open the door even as I was driving away. I just kept driving. I drove for hours before I went back to my friend's house. I was scared that somehow those guys were going to follow me, and I didn't want them to know where I was staying. I called my friend back and told him everything. I eventually called the authorities, but it was too late. The post was gone, and apparently, the cell phone was some sort of track phone, and Keith ditched it. I gave them the best description I could, but as far as I know, Keith and those 2 other guys are still out there in the world. What scares me every time I think about that night is when I think about their intention. This wasn't just a robbery. He lured me in with a $45 deal. Whatever these monsters wanted, it wasn't just money. It was so much worse. I start going down a rabbit hole in my mind, thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't somehow escaped. As I wrote this story, I'm well aware of the stupid choices I made along the way. I'm just so thankful I'm here to tell it. I was 26 when this happened, and it was my first time ever going to Coachella. My friend Alyssa and I had talked about going for years, but either money got in the way or one of us couldn't get time off work. That year, everything finally lined up, so we actually committed to it. We flew out to California, rented a little 2-bedroom Airbnb, and made a whole trip out of it. We were both really excited because neither of us had ever been to a festival that big before. We had both been to smaller concerts and local stuff, but nothing on that level. The whole first day honestly felt like stepping into another world. Everywhere you looked, there were huge crowds, weird outfits, music coming from different directions, and people acting like they had no responsibilities at all. Best way to put it, it was a fairy tale world. It was kind of overwhelming at first, but in a good way. We had a really good first 2 days, nothing bad happened. We saw a bunch of artists we liked, took pictures everywhere, ate overpriced food, and stayed out late. We were tired by the end of each night, but it was worth it. By the third day, we were exhausted. But it was that kind of exhausted where you know you just have to push through because it's the last day and you don't want to waste it. Before the trip, Alyssa had brought up the idea of bringing Molly. I had only done it one other time years before, and it had been fine, so I agreed. We kept saying we'd save it for the last day, and that's exactly what we did. Looking back, I wish more than anything I never touched it. We took it in the late afternoon before one of the sets we were really excited for. At first, I didn't feel much. We were walking around trying to get closer to one of the stages, and I remember saying to Alyssa that I thought maybe it was weak or old because it wasn't hitting me. She said the same thing because she wasn't feeling much either. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then, out of nowhere, it started kicking in hard. At first, I actually liked it. I felt lighter, more social, and everything around me seemed brighter and more exciting. The music sounded amazing. I remember thinking that I understood why people did it at festivals. But after maybe an hour, something started bothering me. I kept noticing the same person. At first, I thought I was imagining it. There were thousands of people there, so of course you're going to accidentally notice the same outfit or the same face more than once. But this wasn't like that. It was the same actual guy. The first time I really noticed him, he was maybe 20 feet away in the crowd. He looked older than most people around us, maybe around 35. He had dark hair, kind of scruffy facial hair, and was wearing a black shirt and boots, which already made him stand out because most people there were dressed way lighter and more colorful. He wasn't doing anything crazy, he was just standing there looking in our direction. I didn't let it bother me at first. Then later I saw him again near one of the drink stands, then again when we were moving between stages, then again when Alyssa and I were standing off to the side near a fence trying to decide where to go next. After the 4th or 5th time, I told Alyssa I kept seeing the same guy everywhere. She laughed and right away said it was probably just the Molly and that I was focusing too hard on random people. I remember laughing a little too because I didn't want to sound too paranoid, but it was getting hard to brush off. It wasn't like I was just noticing him in the distance once in a while. It felt like every time I turned around he was there. Not right next to me, but always somewhere in view. Hours went by like that. I was trying to still enjoy myself, but the high had started feeling off. It stopped being that warm, fun feeling and started turning into this restless, overstimulated feeling. My jaw tensed up, my heart felt too fast, and I couldn't seem to relax. I told myself I was probably dehydrated or tired. We had been doing a lot all weekend, barely sleeping, walking around in the heat, drinking, everything. At one point when we were packed into the crowd waiting for another set, that guy finally came right up to me. It happened so suddenly that I froze for a second. He came up on my side smiling and started trying to dance near me like he was just some random friendly festival guy. Then he leaned in and started saying stuff to me that I could barely hear over the music, but it was obvious he was flirting. I remember him saying I looked really good and asking if I was there with anyone. I told him I was there with my friend and tried to be polite about it because I didn't want to set him off or make a scene. I kind of smiled and shook my head and said I was good. He kept hovering though. It wasn't aggressive yet, but it was pushy enough to make me uncomfortable. I turned to pull Alyssa closer to me so we could just move away, and that was when I realized she wasn't there anymore. I started turning in circles looking for her, thinking maybe she just moved a few feet away, but I couldn't see her anywhere. That made me panic way faster than it normally would because of how off I already felt. The guy noticed right away that I was looking around and asked if I lost my friend. I said yes. Then he said he could help me look for her. There was something about the way he said it that made me instantly not trust him at all. It was too eager. I just told him no thanks and started pushing my way out of the crowd. He didn't grab me or anything, but I could feel him watching me leave. I finally got away from that stage and found a patch of grass farther back where it was quieter and less packed. I sat down because I felt like my body was shutting down on me. My vision started getting weird in a way I never felt before. The best way I can describe it is that everything looked squiggly. Not blurry exactly, but like nothing would stay still. The lights, the people, even the ground all had this shaky look to them. It scared me because I knew then that I had taken too much or had some kind of bad reaction. I started calling Alyssa over and over. The calls kept failing or not going through because the service there was terrible. I probably called her 10 times before one finally connected. When she picked up, I could barely hear her, but I just kept telling her where I was and that I needed her to come get me because something was wrong. It felt like forever before she found me, but it was probably only around 15 minutes. She could tell right away I was not okay. I told her I needed to leave, and she didn't argue with me. We ended up leaving the festival way earlier than we planned because I was having such a bad high. The walk out felt endless. Every noise felt too loud, and every person brushing past me made me jump. I kept looking around, half expecting to see that same guy again, but I didn't. Back at the Airbnb, both of us were completely drained. We had one more night there, and then we were flying home the next evening. Alyssa started talking about packing some of her stuff up that night so she wouldn't have to do it in the morning, but I told her I'd do mine tomorrow. I just wanted to lay down. My body was exhausted in a way that overpowered everything else. Even though I was still high, I felt so physically dead that I just crawled into bed, shut the light off, and laid there in the dark. I didn't feel normal, but I felt too tired to care. I must have drifted off into this half-sleep state because I wasn't fully out, but I definitely lost track of time. Then at some point, I opened my eyes. I have no idea what woke me up. Maybe a sound, maybe just my body being on edge, but the second I looked toward the bedroom doorway, I saw a figure standing there. It was tall and completely still, just inside the doorway, facing me. At first, my brain couldn't even process what I was looking at. I thought maybe Alyssa was standing there for some reason, but it was too tall and broad. Then I focused on the face. Even in the dark, I could tell. It was the man from the festival. I know how insane that sounds, especially with the state I was in, but that's exactly what I saw. He stood there looking at me from a few feet away from my bed. I remember this horrible, cold feeling going through my whole body. Then I started screaming. Not just yelling, full-on screaming as loud as I could while throwing the covers over my head like that was going to do something. I kept screaming until Alyssa came into my room. The second she turned on the light, there was nobody there. The doorway was empty. The room was empty. Alyssa kept asking me what happened, and I was crying so hard I could barely get the words out. I told her I saw the guy from the festival standing in my doorway. She looked freaked out by how serious I was, but she kept telling me that it had to be the drugs and that I was still having a bad high. I honestly wanted to believe her, because the other option was way worse. But what bothered me was how real it looked. It didn't feel dreamlike at all. It felt like waking up and seeing an actual person in the room. I begged Alyssa to sleep in the bed with me that night, and she did. Neither of us wanted to go back to sleep after that, so we laid there talking quietly for a while with the lights on in the hallway. She kept trying to calm me down and make normal conversation. Eventually, somehow, we both drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to Alyssa screaming my name and shaking me. For a second, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. Then I sat up and saw her standing near my bedroom doorway, staring at the floor. I looked down and saw muddy boot prints on the hardwood. I still get chills thinking about it. They started near the front part of the house and came down the hall. Then they stopped right at the doorway, exactly where I had seen that figure standing. After that, the prints turned around and went back down the hall toward the front door. I remember just staring at them, feeling this rush of sickness go through me. It was like my whole body dropped. That was the moment I realized what I saw was not some Molly hallucination. Somebody had really been inside that house while we were sleeping, or while I was half asleep. And unless there was some impossible coincidence, it was him. Alyssa looked just as scared as I felt. We started checking everything right away. We made sure the front door was locked now, checked the windows, checked both bedrooms, the bathroom, every room. Nothing obvious was missing, which somehow made it creepier to me. It meant whoever came in wasn't just trying to steal something. We packed faster than I thought possible. Neither of us showered, ate, or even really talked much. We just threw everything into our suitcases and got out of there. Once we were out, we contacted the Airbnb host and told them someone had broken in during the night. I remember sending pictures of the prints because I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. The host sounded shocked and apologetic, but by then I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. We spent the rest of that day basically on edge until it was finally time to go to the airport. We made it home safely and nothing else happened, but that whole trip has stayed with me ever since. What bothers me most is not knowing exactly how he found us, assuming it really was him. Maybe he followed us when we left. Maybe he saw us call a ride. Maybe he watched from farther away than I realized. I don't know. I just know I saw that man at the festival over and over, then I saw him in the doorway, and the boot prints proved someone had actually been there. Ever since that happened, I have never touched Molly again or any drug like it. People joke about bad trips, but that experience permanently changed how I think. Even now, I guess due to PTSD, I still glance at the bedroom doorway first before anything else. Over the summer, my girlfriend from college, Valentina, invited me to come visit her family. Her family lives in San Diego, California. My parents basically forced me to go because I wasn't doing anything else that summer besides working and sleeping. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just gotten off my plane. The flight felt like forever since I was flying across the country. I got a text from Valentina telling me to come outside so she could pick me up. She and her dad came to pick me up in an old Toyota. I don't remember much from the car ride to her beach house, though. We pulled up to a beautiful villa on the beach. Valentina's dad helped me get my suitcase out and escorted me to my room. My room was on the lower level, separated from everyone else upstairs. For a guest room, however, it had a great view of the beach. I could also see the side stairs that led to the front door on the second floor. I unpacked my clothes and toiletries, trying to get settled into my room. Then I heard knocking on my door. It was Valentina. She wanted me to meet her siblings, but I'm not going to talk about them much, as they're irrelevant to the story. However, she introduced me to her mom. Her mom was a nice older woman. She made me feel welcomed. Valentina ended the conversation when she said she was taking me to the beach. She went upstairs to change. I went to my room to do the same. We got on the beach and the sun was setting. She told me it's a great time to take some pictures for my Instagram. Being the nice and helpful person I am, I agreed I would take her pictures. The beach was crowded, so I knew this would be difficult. I probably took 100 pictures before she was finally satisfied. I looked back at the pictures, and something was off about them. I noticed a man in the background of every picture, sometimes staring at Valentina from behind or staring at me. I looked at the general direction he was standing in the most recent picture, but he was gone. I muttered to myself, what the f***? I tried telling Valentina, but she just shrugged it off. I started to feel very paranoid. I always had the fear of someone stalking me. I knew I had to be a man and hide this fear. Later, Valentina and I went back out to the beach. It was around midnight, and one of her best friends was having a bonfire. We walked down to the beach to the gathering. After being a social butterfly for a while, my boss called me. He was pretty chill, so I told him about my trip and when I would be back. As I was talking to him, I saw a black figure on the beach, just staring at me. I pretended not to see him and just turned the other direction. I guess my boss noticed my sudden pause because he asked, "Are you okay?" I responded quickly saying, "Yeah, I was just a little surprised by what I just saw." He didn't question it and immediately got back on topic. The party started to die down. People were finishing up their drinks and getting into their Ubers. I asked Valentina's best friend, who was sober, if she could drive us home. She agreed to take us home since we were a 2-minute drive away. In the car, Valentina asked me, why didn't we just walk back on the beach? I was debating whether I should tell her the truth or if I should just make something up. I told her, "You're absolutely plastered right now. There's no way you're walking." She rolled her eyes. We got home and I helped her upstairs because I needed her to be quiet. I slept in her room that night because I didn't feel safe being alone downstairs near the beach. The next day came. I woke up with a feeling of having to throw up. I stayed in bed all day. I told Valentina and her parents that I just needed rest for a day, then I would be able to function for the rest of the week. I woke up around 7 p.m. to Valentina knocking on my door. She told me they're going to downtown San Diego for dinner, but would be back before midnight. I nodded my head in agreement, then went back to sleep. I started to have a dream of someone tapping on a glass table rapidly. It was getting so annoying that I woke up. The tapping stopped. I turned on my side to face the exterior stairs, and that was when I saw it. I saw the guy from the pictures at the beach at my window, waving at me. He had a black hood on. He went running up the stairs, where I heard the front door open. I nearly screamed. Wasn't the front door locked? How was he in the house? I went to my door and put my weight on it. He wasn't getting in. I heard nothing. No one going down the stairs or anything. Then I heard someone on the other side of the door jerking the door handle. He was trying to put his weight into the door, but nothing was coming through that door. I heard him back away from the door. That's when I grabbed my phone and called 911. It took 5 minutes before I heard the police opening the front door. I decided it was safe to leave my room, and I booked it upstairs. But of course, the creep had left long before the cops showed up. Shortly behind the cops, Valentina's family showed up worried. They asked me if I was okay, but that wasn't what was important. I needed to make sure he didn't take or do anything. I heard a scream from Valentina as she went to her room. I followed her in. She pointed to a camera in the corner of the room. The police took it for investigation. The creep also took Valentina's clothes and bathing suits. I stayed for the rest of the week, but I'm still scared from that experience 2 months later. I don't know how that guy found us or what his intentions were. I didn't know if he wanted me or Valentina, but most frightening, what would he have done if he did get into my room? My girlfriend and I took a trip to Palm Springs last year because we both needed a break from work and just wanted somewhere quiet where we could sit by a pool and relax. We found a modern-looking Airbnb that was about 15 minutes outside the main part of the city, kind of on the edge where the houses start getting more spaced apart and the desert starts taking over. It was a one-story house with big glass doors facing the backyard and a decent-sized pool. The listing said it was very private and good for couples. That was exactly what we wanted. We booked it for 4 nights. When we arrived, the place looked exactly like the photos. It was clean, modern, had white walls, concrete floors, basic furniture. The backyard had a pool, some lounge chairs, and one of those small storage sheds off to the side that I assumed was just for pool equipment. There was desert all around the back fence, and you couldn't really see any neighbors from the yard. The host never met us in person. We just got a door code. Everything felt normal the first day. We went out to dinner, came back, watched TV, and went to sleep. The first weird thing happened the first night, but it was small. Around maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up because I thought I heard something outside. It sounded like maybe a light thump or something hitting the side of the house. I just assumed it was the house settling or maybe wind. Desert areas get weird temperature changes at night, so I figured it was that. I went back to sleep. The second day, we mostly stayed by the pool. At one point, while we were laying on the chairs, I thought I heard what sounded like a voice somewhere far away. Not like someone talking normally, more like someone calling something out. I even asked my girlfriend if she heard it. She said she thought she heard something, but we both kind of laughed it off because there was basically nothing around us. There was no sidewalks, there was no foot traffic, it was just sand and scattered houses way off in the distance. We even joked it was probably just something dragging lightly against the outside wall near the bedroom. I got up and looked through the glass door, but didn't see anything. The backyard lights weren't on, and everything looked normal. I told her it was probably just branches or some animal. There were lizards and stuff around, so we didn't think much of it. Night 2, we again heard a couple sounds, but nothing that made us think someone was actually there. Just random ticks and small impacts that you could easily explain away. Night 3 was when everything changed. We had gone to bed around midnight, and I was still awake scrolling on my phone when I noticed light coming through the sides of the blinds. At first, I thought maybe a car drove by, but then it stayed on. I got up and looked through the edge of the blinds and saw one of the motion lights on in the backyard. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, and then it shut off. About maybe 10 seconds later, another one turned on further down along the side of the house. That immediately made my stomach drop because it didn't feel random. It felt like something was triggering them in a path. My girlfriend asked what I was doing, and I told her I thought someone might be outside. She immediately sat up and got scared. We both watched as another light turned on near the back fence, then another closer to the pool. It really looked like someone walking around the outside of the house. She started telling me to close the blinds fully. She kept saying, "Shut them, shut them." I closed them completely, and we both just sat there quietly. I could tell she was genuinely scared. I was too, but I was trying not to show it, part of being a man in a relationship, I guess. She kept saying we should just ignore it and stay inside, but my brain kept going to the idea that someone could be trying to break in. I said I was going to go check outside just to make sure. She kept telling me not to. She actually grabbed my arm and told me that was a stupid idea. I told her I would just step out for a minute. I went into the kitchen and grabbed one of the bigger knives from the knife block. I didn't tell her this though, I didn't want to freak her out. I remember my hands actually shaking a little, which isn't normal for me. I opened the back sliding door slowly and stepped outside. It was dead quiet out there. I stood there for maybe a minute just listening. Then I walked slowly around the pool area, looking around the fence line and the corners of the house. I didn't see anyone. After maybe 5 minutes, I started thinking maybe I was just being paranoid and that maybe an animal had triggered the lights. Then I noticed footprints in the sand near the side of the house. They were very clear shoe prints, not animal tracks. This is when my heart started pounding. The prints went from the side of the yard toward the small shed that was next to the house. I followed them slowly, trying to be quiet. I remember thinking if someone was hiding, I didn't want to surprise them, but I also didn't want them surprising me. The footprints went straight to the shed door. When I got there, the doors were completely closed. The footprints just ended right in front of me. That was the moment I felt actual fear. Not just nervousness, real fear. I stood there maybe 3 or 4 feet from the door, just staring at it. I couldn't hear anything at first. I took another step closer and just listened. I was trying to hear breathing or movement. For maybe 5 seconds, there was nothing. Then, very clearly from inside, I heard a man's voice say in a normal, calm tone, "Excuse me, could you open the door, please?" I froze completely. I didn't say anything. Then right after that, the same voice did this quiet, creepy laugh. A small laugh, like he thought something was funny. I didn't wait another second. I turned and ran straight back to the house. I slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. My girlfriend was already standing there asking what happened, and I was honestly struggling to get the words out because I was so freaked out. I told her there was someone in the shed and that he asked me to open the door. She immediately became hysterical, asking if I was serious. I told her, yes, unfortunately I am, and I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the phone explaining everything, we saw the outside lights turn off again. Then about 15 seconds later, one of them turned back on. Then another, again like someone moving around the house. But now we couldn't see anything because the blinds were completely shut. That almost made it worse because we knew someone was out there, but couldn't see where. The dispatcher told us to stay inside and keep everything locked. It took about 20 minutes for police to get there because of how far out the house was. Those 20 minutes honestly felt like hours. Every little sound made us jump. When the police finally arrived, they knocked and announced themselves, and I've never felt more relieved to see the police, coming from someone who hates the cops. They checked the backyard first and then the shed. One of the officers told me to stay inside while they opened it. After a few minutes, they came back and said nobody was inside anymore. They asked me a bunch of questions about what exactly I heard and saw. I told them everything, including the voice and the footprints. They said it looked like someone may have been staying in there temporarily. They found some empty water bottles and food wrappers. One officer told us sometimes people hide in vacant properties or rental properties, especially in more isolated areas. He said the person probably left once they realized we had called the police. They recommended we not stay there that night, and probably not the rest of the trip either. Before we finished packing, one of the officers asked if either of us owned a dirty baseball hat he found pushed behind the couch. We both immediately said no. We went through the whole Airbnb multiple times, and we both knew for a fact that hat was not there before. The officer just kind of nodded and said it was possible the guy had gotten inside at some point, but we'd have no real way of knowing when. That honestly shook me almost more than the shed did, because it meant he might have been inside while we were there, maybe even while we slept. That was enough for us. We packed everything immediately. While we were packing, I tried messaging the Airbnb host multiple times explaining what happened and asking if they knew anything about someone accessing the shed. Every message showed as read, but he never responded. That honestly made it even creepier. No response, not even concern. We left and drove back toward the city and ended up staying at a cheap motel because it was the only thing available last minute. The next day, I contacted Airbnb support directly and explained everything and gave them the police report number. It took about a day of arguing, but they did refund us for the last unused night. We never heard from the host again. No apology or explanation or anything. We tried to still enjoy the rest of the trip and did some normal tourist stuff, but honestly, it kind of stuck with us the whole time. The worst part for me is just knowing someone had been right outside where we were sleeping for multiple nights, and we probably just kept dismissing the sounds as normal house noises. And I think about how calm that voice sounded when he asked me to open the door, like it was some joke to him, like he expected me to actually do it. And honestly, knowing now there was proof he had been inside the house at some point makes it even harder not to think about. This happened spring break, about 4 years ago. My girlfriend Anissa wanted to do something low-key. She'd been talking about a cabin trip for months, just somewhere to disappear for a few days with no obligations. Her brother Hunter was on break from school and was staying with us at the time anyway, so he came too. I found a place online. It was pretty deep in the woods, which was the point, and it was cheaper than it had any right to be. I remember thinking that briefly, and then not thinking about it again. We got there Friday night around dinner time. The place felt genuinely cut off. You couldn't see the road you'd driven on from the front porch, which I actually liked at the time. There was an outbuilding off to the side of the property, like a large shed which was padlocked. Hunter played with the lock for a second and said it looked new, like it had been swapped out recently. I said it was probably just the owner keeping equipment in there. We didn't really think much of it. It was getting dark, so we went inside and immediately started making dinner. That first night was fine. We had a few drinks on the porch and went to bed pretty early. I can't remember exactly when, but it started lightly raining at some point. The woods were really loud, which was a major surprise, at least to me. It was this constant wall of insects and frogs, and something about it was actually really calming. I do want to mention that at some point before falling asleep that night, I heard something bigger moving around out there, although I figured it was just a deer. I fell asleep not long after that. What woke me up was a sound like something hitting the side of the cabin. I don't know what time it was exactly, let's just say 2. I froze there in bed for a minute, wondering if what I heard was just part of my dream or not. Right when I was about to try falling back asleep, I heard another thump which sounded identical to the first one. I rolled over to see if Anissa was awake, but she wasn't. So it was up to me to investigate. I really didn't want to, but if there was a bear poking around out there, it would have been better to know about it than to not know. So I reluctantly got out of bed and grabbed one of our flashlights. I didn't want to go outside, but the outdoor visibility through the cabin windows was limited. Despite that, I noticed what appeared to be footsteps on the ground near the outbuilding, which was incredibly alarming. Those footprints could not have been ours because none of us had been outside the cabin after the rain had started, at least not to my knowledge. I reasoned that it was possible Hunter had gone out there without me realizing, so I figured I'd ask him in the morning. Still, I was pretty confident that he wouldn't have done that, which made the situation all the more eerie. The footprints didn't look like an animal's, although they were too far away to tell for sure, and if I had been unwilling to go outside earlier, there was absolutely no chance I was doing so after seeing what I saw. I made sure the place was locked up and went back to sleep. Unfortunately, the night was far from over. I woke up a few hours later to knocking on the front door, which is one of the most terrifying things I can imagine waking up to. Hearing that knocking meant there was a stranger out there, which actually got my heart going a little bit. It was just so late. I couldn't think of a good reason why someone would be knocking on a cabin door in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m. The knocking woke up Anissa, who was about 10 times more scared than I was. I had to do something. So I walked over to the door. Before I could even announce myself, the person on the other side said he was a forest ranger and that there'd been some kind of incident in the area and he needed to do a welfare check. I paused a bit before responding, mostly out of fear, but it was obvious he already knew I was there. I told him we were all good and didn't need to be checked up on, saying I just wanted to get back to sleep. I thought that would do the trick, because he paused for a little while before saying anything. But then, instead of leaving, he said he'd need to ask us a few questions. I was instantly suspicious, and I was almost fully confident the person on the other side of the door was not any kind of law enforcement. At that point, Hunter had woken up too and was standing behind me. I whispered to him to call the police, saying I'd stall the guy at the door. I went back and forth with him, giving him nothing answers without telegraphing my suspicion. After a little back and forth, Hunter walked up to me and whispered that the police said no rangers had been dispatched to the area. That's what I suspected, but hearing Hunter actually vocalize it made my heart rate kick up again. I was scared and downright panicking at that point. It was 4 a.m. We were truly in the middle of nowhere, and some guy was banging on the door pretending to be a ranger. I don't know how, but it felt like the person on the porch could sense my fear, because he raised his voice and started banging on the door a little harder. I told the person I wasn't going to open up and I wasn't going to answer any questions, which only seemed to anger him. He started demanding I open the door, threatening to kick it down and telling me I'd be arrested for failure to comply. That's when Anissa screamed at him to go the fuck away, which only made things worse. He started kicking the door, and when it didn't give, he stomped around the cabin. I yelled at Anissa to go lock herself in the bathroom, which she did. Hunter and I grabbed some knives from the kitchen and just kind of tracked the guy's sounds around the cabin. I was beyond terrified, but I had no choice but to prepare for a fight. This guy meant us harm. This guy was trying to break into our cabin and kill us. Before I could react, one of the windows shattered into a million pieces. That guy had thrown a rock through it. I was ready for him to jump through, but he didn't. It was the tensest moment of my life. After what felt like forever, with Hunter and me just staring at a broken window, I heard police sirens approaching. I'll fast forward through this next part. The police searched the area, but miraculously, they couldn't find the guy. Hunter was furious. He was practically yelling at the officers that the freak had been on the property less than a minute before they arrived, so he had to be close by still. The officers said there was nothing they could do, and advised us to just pack up and leave. So, that's exactly what we did. It's not like we had much of a choice. But Hunter wouldn't let go of how incompetent those officers were being. It was only after the fear and adrenaline wore off, and we were driving away, that I realized how truly insane what just happened was. For someone to even know about that cabin in the first place was so unlikely. It was like they planned it. And what they even wanted was a mystery in and of itself. All in all, it was an extremely uncomfortable and unsettling experience. This happened back in 2016 when I was a senior in college. I was in a frat, TKE, and one of the traditions that came with being in Greek life, at least at our school, was that you spent spring break with your brothers and whatever sorority or sororities you were affiliated with. The groups were typically huge, usually 30 or 40 people, and everyone packed into the same rental or resort for the whole week. I won't say it was the most wholesome experience you could have in your early 20s, but I also won't pretend I didn't have a ridiculous amount of fun doing it. That particular year, the plan was Acapulco. I don't remember whose idea it was originally, but within a few weeks, we had something like 40 people booked at this resort on the Pacific coast. The main character in this story isn't actually me. It's my buddy Sahil. I'm gonna try putting this as nicely as possible. He was the kind of person who, no matter what situation you put him in, was gonna find a way to make it louder and more complicated than it needed to be. I say that with total affection, because Sahil was genuinely one of the best people I knew in college. He just had absolutely zero self-preservation instincts and no impulse control, which was especially problematic because he was incredibly impulsive. We were maybe 3 or 4 days into the trip when a group of us decided to go to the local clubs. It was a great time, right up until Sahil, true to form, started scanning the room looking for someone who could get him something. Let's just say, stronger than whatever was in his glass. I'm not going to bother spelling things out, but it shouldn't be too hard to connect the dots here. It was a terrible idea. We were in a foreign country in a city with a reputation that wasn't exactly clean. Plus, nobody in our group spoke any Spanish. I told him to drop it. A couple of the other guys said the same thing, and Sahil said he would. But I knew he wouldn't. I had been through his shit too many times. We kept an eye on him for a while, but the place was genuinely enormous, and after a while, we kind of stopped tracking where he was. He was a grown-ass man. I wasn't about to waste my night babysitting him. I figured he was somewhere in the crowd. Sahil disappearing into a crowd was not unusual. I went about my night with my other friends, and it was a great time. Sahil never turned up though, which I found stranger and stranger the later it got. I don't remember what triggered it, but one second we were all drinking and partying, having a good time, and the next, we were all frantically trying to contact Sahil. He wasn't answering anyone's text messages, and when we called his phone, it went straight to voicemail, meaning it was dead. That wasn't good. Sahil may have been a crazy dude, but he was an organizational freak. He wouldn't just let his phone die like that. After a little while longer, we made the call to leave. Odds were he was back at the resort, and we'd find him passed out in his bed. The sidewalk outside was a mess of people trying to get cabs all at once, so a few of us walked about a block and a half before pulling out phones to call a driver. It was probably around 1 in the morning, so we're just standing there waiting on a driver, when who do we see but Sahil, stumbling towards us out of the darkness. We ran up to him, and it was immediately obvious that something seriously bad happened. He was a complete wreck. His shirt was torn almost fully off, and his face was completely swollen, not to mention the fact that he was limping. We got him into the car and back to the resort. A couple guys kept asking him what happened, and he kept saying he'd explain later. It wasn't until we were back in one of the rooms that he finally started talking. Here's what he told us. He found a guy near the bar, the short Mexican guy who didn't speak much English. He had a friend with him who was supposedly doing the translating. Sahil made it clear what he was looking for, and the guy understood. Sahil told us he was reluctant right away because something felt off about the translator specifically, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Then the short guy pulled out a small sample and offered it to him right there, and Sahil tried it. He said it was good, and that's kind of where his judgment evaporated. After that, the short guy said he couldn't do business inside the club and told Sahil to come outside with him. Sahil knew he shouldn't have gone, but he went anyway. Which, I mean, what do you even say to that? They walked out a side exit, and there was a car waiting just outside the door. Before Sahil really understood what was happening, they were already pulling him into the back seat. They drove. He said it felt like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but he was panicking and not exactly thinking straight, so he honestly wasn't sure. What he was sure about was that they went rummaging through his pockets the second the car started moving. They robbed him, and when he tried to resist, they beat him senseless. They destroyed his phone and stripped him of everything of value. What saved him was that at some point during the drive, one of the guys asked him why there were so many Americans in the city right now, and Sahil, without really thinking about it, explained that he was there on spring break with dozens of other students from the same university who were all staying at the same resort. He had no idea at the time that he was essentially talking his way out of being killed or trafficked. The two guys went back and forth in Spanish for a while after that. Then the car pulled over and they threw him out. He landed on some random road he didn't recognize and just started walking. He didn't know where he was, so he had no choice but to just walk in the direction he thought the car had driven, and by some miracle, it turned out to be the correct decision. I really don't know what would have happened to him had he not run into us, or if he had left the club 20 minutes sooner. We debated calling the police for about 3 seconds before unanimously deciding that was probably the worst idea for everyone involved, Sahil included. Besides the guys in our immediate group, nobody at the resort ever found out what happened. I've been keeping this one bottled up for quite a while now. This happened during spring break of my junior year. I graduated a while ago, so we're going back a few years here. I should mention that I'm kind of a paranoid person. I've just always been naturally observant, skeptical, and cynical. Those honestly aren't the healthiest traits to have. I end up spending a lot of time overthinking and worrying about things that don't matter, but I can't control it. My ex-girlfriend Anna had this friend named Lena. Lena was the type of girl who always knew where the party was and was plugged into every group chat and social circle imaginable, which is why it wasn't surprising in the slightest when she approached Anna with a spring break plan. She said a girl she knew had told her about a lake house trip out in the Ozarks. According to Lena, a bunch of people from that girl's sorority and some of the affiliated frats were renting this big house on the water for the week. Pretty standard, to be completely honest. I wasn't exactly the spring break type, but Anna really wanted to go, and I didn't have a reason not to, so I figured what the hell. There were 4 of us, myself, Anna, Lena, and Lena's boyfriend Colby. Colby opted to drive because he had the biggest car, which was pretty chill of him. It was a long but good drive. Everyone was in a good mood. The final stretch was this long, twisting road that didn't have many houses on it. We pulled up to the house around 5 in the afternoon, and my first thought was that Lena had severely undersold it. The place was massive, right on the lake with this humongous wraparound deck and a dock that went way out over the water. It was the kind of house that makes you wonder who actually owns it. There were also way more cars in the front of the house than I was expecting. Lena had made it sound like there'd only be 15 to 20 people, but I counted at least 25 cars in the grass lot next to the house, with more parked down the road because there wasn't room. That's where Colby had to park. We walked up the front steps to see a guy standing near the front door. He seemed to be about our age, or maybe a little older. He introduced himself, but I don't remember his name, so I'll just call him the host. He seemed friendly enough, but the very first thing I clocked about him was that his speech seemed rehearsed, like he'd had this exact conversation multiple times. And to be fair, he probably had, but it still felt weird to me. You know those safety speeches frat pledges have to give before letting you into a party? It felt kind of like that. He gave us the rundown. He told us where to find our rooms, how to navigate the house, when we could do this or that, typical house rule stuff like that. Then he brought up the car keys. He said the roads around the lake were narrow and dangerous at night, especially after people had been drinking. He told us it was a liability thing and that they were collecting everyone's keys at the door. He had this whole little speech about it. Colby sort of shrugged it before handing his keys over. The host made a big show about thanking Colby for playing by the rules, which I thought was kind of obnoxious. Then, he opened the door and let us in. I made a mental note of what he was doing with the car keys, and I was pleasantly surprised to see a big bowl of other car keys on the table in the foyer. The host tossed Colby's keys into the bowl and told us to have fun before stepping back outside and closing the door. We went and found our room, which had 2 double beds and a tiny balcony that overlooked the water. We put our stuff away and went back downstairs. Lena was really eager to find her friend, so we followed her. It didn't take long to figure out where the main lounge was. It was this giant open room on the first floor that was lined with full glass windows so you could get a wraparound view of the water. It was honestly pretty awesome. There must have been at least 30 people hanging out in that one room, but the weird thing was that Lena didn't recognize a single one of them. They all looked like college kids, Greek life people even, but Lena couldn't find her friend or anyone else she knew in the crowd. I wasn't just going to stand there in the corner, so I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a beer for myself and Colby, and made my way over to the pool table, which no one was using. I've never had a hard time connecting with new people, so I didn't really care that we didn't know anyone. Colby didn't seem to care either. We played pool, talked, drank, and just enjoyed the vibe. Our girlfriends came over a little later and told us Lena's friend wasn't answering her phone. They seemed overly concerned about it, but Colby and I told them it was fine, and it was fine. I'm not gonna lie, the first night was actually really fun. Colby and I socialized with a bunch of people who were all really dope. Anna and Lena got along with the girls, and there seemed to be an unlimited supply of alcohol and games. There was one thing that was nagging at me, despite all the fun I was having. It was the host. He wasn't really partying, but was always there, walking through the rooms and occasionally talking to people. My first thought was that he was enjoying some slightly bolder substances in some back room with a select few people, but I felt like that was unlikely because I never saw a drink in his hand. At one point, I saw him standing near the back door with a clipboard, like an actual physical clipboard with paper on it, and he was writing something down. Most of the party felt like strangers getting to know each other, which is kind of what I expected, but there were maybe 8 to 10 people who interacted with each other differently. At first, I just thought a big portion of the group already knew each other, but I couldn't help but notice that some of the people who seemed familiar with each other introduced themselves during games and whatnot. As more time passed, I also realized that the 4 of us weren't merging with some bigger group that all knew each other, but rather the whole group was split into a bunch of smaller groups like ours. Besides those 10 or so people, no one knew anyone beyond the people they had pulled up with. I mentioned it to Anna, and she said I was overthinking things, which was probably true. She was also pretty wasted at that point, so I wasn't going to complicate things. Lena's friend never showed up that first night. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. I went down to the kitchen and made myself a coffee. Then I went out on the deck to sit by myself for a while. I made note of the fact that the bowl with everyone's keys wasn't by the front door anymore, which was a little odd. I wanted to be left alone, so I chose to sit on the side of the house, with the driveway to my left and the water to my right. It was actually really peaceful. Around mid-morning, I noticed a couple I'd seen the night before packing up their stuff. They said goodbye to a few people, and I watched them drive out of sight. Fast forward till later that night, and we're sitting by the bonfire. I was sitting with Anna and a few other people when I happened to glance across the fire toward the far end of the circle. There was a couple sitting together, slightly further back from the group than everyone else. They were positioned with the fire between us, which made it harder to get a clean look. But I kept watching. I realized it was the same guy and girl from earlier, the ones who had left in the morning. I was dead certain of it. I told Anna, and she gave me this confused look. She hadn't seen them leave, so she probably assumed I was misremembering things. There wasn't much I could do to convince her, so instead, I just got up and immediately made my way through the house. I remembered which car was theirs, so I was going to see if it was still gone. I made it to the driveway, and to my surprise, the car wasn't there. Despite that, I was positive the people I had seen were the ones who had left, but by the time I got back to the bonfire, they were gone. I couldn't find them anywhere, and it bugged me for the rest of the night. I didn't bother telling Colby or Lena, and every time I mentioned it to Anna, she told me I was being a psychotic buzzkill. The next morning, I made it a point to wake up really early again. I wanted to go for a walk. I'm not really sure what it was I was looking for, but I needed to convince myself that I wasn't trapped and that there was something outside that house and those people. About a quarter mile down the road, past a bend where you couldn't see anything from the house, there was an equipment shed, some kind of storage building for groundskeeping staff. I walked around it, and my jaw damn near hit the floor. It was the couple's car from the day before. I was sure of it. I just stood there. I don't know how long. I wasn't scared. It was more like confirmation of something I already knew, but I hadn't been able to prove. I turned around and walked back to the house without telling anyone. I was starting to freak out after that. Why would someone pretend to leave? And then I started thinking about those people they had been saying goodbye to, and I wondered if they were in on it as well. I knew what I had to do. That afternoon, I found that couple near the dock. It took me a really long time to find them, and I had to make up some bullshit excuse to tell Anna. I didn't even sugarcoat it. I just bluntly asked them if they had left the morning before. They both gave me a funny look and acted like I was crazy, but I could tell my question struck a nerve. I swear to God, though, it was like everyone around could hear our conversation. There weren't that many people around, but while I was standing there, everyone quieted down a little bit, and I couldn't help but feel like there were eyes on me. Luckily, Anna appeared out of nowhere and told me to have a drink with her. I initially wanted to press that couple, but the way everyone else reacted made me feel deeply uncomfortable in a way that's hard to describe. I told Anna everything, and she actually took me seriously when I brought up the car detail. Then she went on to tell me that she had picked up on some weird stuff herself, like some of the girls having almost identical backstories and stuff like that. I suggested leaving early, but she told me that was probably premature. Either way, the bad feeling I had gotten the first day was getting worse and worse. By the time I woke up the next morning, I made the decision that we were leaving. Anna agreed. Colby and Lena were a different story. Colby straight up laughed at me. He said he wasn't cutting the trip short because I had a theory. Lena admitted it was weird that her friend had basically ghosted her and that she didn't recognize a single person in the house, but she wasn't ready to panic over a parked car. We argued about it for a little, and I was actually stunned by how stubborn they were both being. It's not like Anna and I could have left on our own. We needed Colby's car. We ended up compromising, and the plan was to stay one final night. I was cool with that until we went downstairs for breakfast. Every single set of eyes was on me. I felt it and I didn't like it. It wasn't obvious, and I tried convincing myself I was just having a paranoid freakout, but people were definitely looking at me. A lot of people, which I found incredibly off-putting because most of the people that were looking at me hadn't even been part of the group that had seen me question that couple. I started feeling like something really, really terrible was going to happen if we stayed in that house for even a moment more. Anna felt the eyes too, because she whispered to me that people were looking. I got up from where we were sitting and walked right over to the host, who was standing near the corner of the room. I told him we had to take off and that I needed my keys. He smiled like a fucking robot, then asked if everything was okay. I told him something came up and we needed to head home, to which he actually asked, "What happened?" I hadn't thought of a fake excuse, so I just told him it was a family emergency. He kept diverting the conversation, saying things like some people had planned a boat thing for the evening, and that the nights always get better as the end of the week approaches. He was doing everything he could to get me to stay, all while still smiling at me like a freak. I didn't care. I told him again that I needed the keys. I cannot verbally explain how awful that feeling was. There was a room full of at least 20 people, and every single one of them was staring at me. The host didn't respond, and his Mr. Charming Guy act was gone. He wasn't smiling anymore. He gave this blank, dead-eyed look that creeped me out. Some random girl who was sitting nearby broke the silence by saying, "That's not a good idea." I turned around to look at her, and she was scowling at me. I didn't know what to say. I looked across the room and saw Anna, Lena, and Colby, and they all looked horrified. The host finally said, "Okay, fine," or something like that, and told me to follow him inside. I saw Anna getting up to follow me, but when he saw her move, he put his hand out and said no in a loud, aggressive way that genuinely startled me. It was almost violent. He told me that only I was to follow him, so that's what I did. He led me through a maze of hallways before we reached a room with everyone's keys hanging on hooks. He didn't even ask me which set was mine. He just picked them out because he clearly already knew. I thought he was going to attack me or withhold the keys, but he handed them to me. Then he said, "You're making a mistake." I didn't give a shit. As soon as I had the keys in my hand, I made my way back over to my group. When I got back to that main room, the music was back on and people were laughing and talking again, like nothing had happened. It was freaky. Anna, Colby, and Lena were in the same spot, and I told them we were going. We were packed and out of there in 10 minutes. The entire time, I felt like someone was going to try and stop us, but no one did. As Colby started driving off, I looked back at the house to see the most unsettling thing yet. There were about a dozen people standing on the deck, watching us leave. They were standing in a line, not talking, and it was very obvious they were watching us. I noticed a couple more people looking through the windows, which pretty much confirmed what I had been suspecting all along. There was something up with that f***ing house. For the rest of the break, Lena tried getting in touch with a girl who had supposedly organized the trip. She called and texted and tried every platform she could think of, but got absolutely nothing back. She was starting to think something had actually happened to her. It wasn't until we were back at school that Lena finally tracked the girl down. This is honestly the craziest part of the story. It turned out that her phone had been stolen about 2 weeks before spring break. She had gotten a new number but hadn't told everyone yet. The person who told Lena about the plan wasn't her friend. It was some stranger. Not a single message came from her. We talked about going to the police, but none of us could articulate what crime had actually been committed against us. We went to a party, it was weird, nobody technically did anything. But it was off to the point where I felt like one more night of that would have had some kind of consequence. One that I can't even imagine. This is something I'll never stop thinking about, mostly because it's such a mystery, and the more you think about it, the less it makes sense. This happened last fall when I was staying in a small town in northern Pennsylvania for work. I do commercial refrigeration repair, and at the time I was driving to different grocery stores and restaurants in smaller towns because our company was short on people. The town I was sent to was the kind of place where everything shut down early, and there were more empty buildings than open ones. I was supposed to be there for 3 nights while I worked on the walk-in freezers at an older family-owned supermarket. My company booked me a motel on the edge of town because it was the only place nearby with vacancy. I got there a little after 7 p.m. on a Thursday. The motel was one of those single-floor places where all the room doors faced the parking lot. It had maybe 12 rooms total, and only 4 or 5 cars in the lot. The office smelled like old coffee and bleach. The woman at the desk was probably in her 60s. She was friendly, but there was something distracted about her. She kept glancing past me toward the parking lot while I was checking in. When she handed me the key, she told me if anyone knocked on my door at night, not to answer it unless it was her or the owner, and she said if I heard anything weird outside, to call the office and not get involved. She said it in a casual voice, like it was normal advice, but it caught me off guard. I asked if that was because the area was bad, and she just said there were some drifters around sometimes, and they like to ask guests for money. I remember thinking it was a strange thing to say to someone who had just arrived, but I was tired and didn't really care. My room was near the far end, second to last. Inside, it was clean enough, but it was kind of old. I noticed cigarette burns in the dresser, and the carpet had dark spots. I brought my bag in, grabbed food at the gas station down the road, and came back around 8. While I was walking to my room, I noticed a man sitting in an older dark green pickup truck 2 spaces away from mine. The truck was running, but the headlights were off. I couldn't see his face clearly because of how dark it was, but I remember he didn't look at me like a normal person would when someone walks by. He just sat perfectly still with both hands on the wheel. I assumed he was waiting for someone. I went inside and spent the next hour eating and watching random stuff on my phone. Around 10:30, I took a shower and got into bed. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps outside my room. That didn't bother me at first because other people were staying there. Then the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I waited for someone to unlock it or knock on the room next to mine, but nothing happened. After maybe 15 seconds, the steps moved on. A minute later, I heard them again, slowly coming back the other direction and stopping outside my door a second time. Still no knock, just silence. And then the footsteps walked away again. I got up and looked through the peephole, but I couldn't see anyone. It was probably just someone drunk or confused about which room was theirs. A little after 11, I was half asleep when someone knocked on the door. I stayed still and waited. Then the person knocked again, the same exact way. I got up quietly and looked through the peephole again. There was nobody there. That made my stomach drop a little. The parking lot lights were dim, but the walkway in front of the rooms was empty. I stood there for a while, then locked the deadbolt again, even though it was already locked. I was about to get back into bed when I noticed the curtain near the window had shifted slightly. It wasn't open enough to see out, just enough to make me realize someone might be able to see in from outside depending on where they stood. I moved it shut and turned off the lamp. I stayed awake another half hour listening. Right around midnight, I heard something that sounded like metal lightly scraping against metal near the door. I got up and stepped as quietly as I could to the door. For the 3rd time, I looked through the peephole. This time, I saw movement. Somebody was crouched low, almost underneath the peephole view. I could only see the top of a dark baseball cap and one shoulder. I don't know how long I stood there, but it couldn't have been more than 5 seconds before the person stood up and moved away. I heard footsteps going fast toward the end of the building. I called the office right away. The woman who answered sounded annoyed at first until I told her someone had been right outside my door. Then she got quiet and asked if I had opened it, to which I said no. She told me to stay inside and said the owner was going to check outside. About 2 minutes later, I saw headlights sweep across the curtain. Someone drove slowly through the lot and then left. The office called back and said nobody was there now, and it was probably just someone messing around. I asked if I should call the police, and she said it wouldn't do any good unless the person came back. I barely slept after that. Every little sound woke me up. At some point around 3 in the morning, I did pass out, but I woke up around 5:15 to the sound of my truck door opening alarm. I jumped out of bed and looked through the window without moving the curtain much. There was a man standing at the driver's side of my truck with the door half open. He was tall and wearing a dark jacket and hat. I couldn't see his face because he was turned away from me. Then he looked straight toward my room, like he knew I was watching. He shut the truck door and walked off fast toward the road behind the motel. I called 911 this time. The police came about 15 minutes later. They took a report and checked my truck, but they found nothing missing because I never leave anything in it. One officer asked if I was sure I locked it, which made me feel like they already didn't believe me. I knew I locked it. The older officer did seem more interested when I told him about the knocking and the crouching outside my door. He asked the motel owner if they had cameras. They did, but only one in the office and one pointing at the front entrance, nothing covering my side of the lot. Before the cops left, the older one told me if it happened again, not to open my door for any reason and to leave as soon as I could in the morning. I asked if they thought it was random, and he just said probably, but his face didn't really match that answer. I had to work that day, and I was already there, so I stayed. I figured I was overreacting anyway. During the day, everything felt normal. I was at the supermarket from 7 a.m. to almost 6 p.m. And by the time I got back to the motel, it was dark again. I parked directly under the brightest light and carried all my tools inside at once so I wouldn't have to go back out. The woman at the desk saw me and asked if I was okay. I told her I hadn't slept. She hesitated for a second and then said if I wanted, she could move me to room 2 near the office. I asked why she hadn't offered that the night before. She said she didn't think it was necessary. Then she added something I've thought about a couple times since. She said it usually doesn't happen 2 nights in a row. I asked what that meant, and she immediately acted like she'd misspoken. She just said the drifters normally move on. That made me more uneasy than I already was. I seriously thought about packing up and driving an hour to another hotel, but I was exhausted, filthy from work, and told myself I could just stay one more night and leave in the morning. Around 8 p.m., I got food and brought it back to my room. While I was eating, I heard a truck drive slowly through the lot. I looked through the curtain and saw the same dark green pickup from the night before. It drove past my room, turned around near the road, and parked at the very end of the lot with the lights off. I couldn't see who was inside. I called the office and told them. The owner answered this time, not the woman. He sounded irritated and told me if the truck wasn't blocking me in or damaging anything, there wasn't much he could do. I asked if he knew who it was, and he just said people come and go. I sat there for maybe an hour, checking the window every few minutes. The truck never moved. Eventually, I turned off the TV and lights and tried to sleep with my clothes still on. Sometime after 11, I heard someone walking outside again. Slow, super slow steps. Then a soft tap at the window, not the door. I stayed in the bed. Then another tap came, this time closer to the center of the glass. Then a fingernail or something dragged slowly down the window. I could hear it clearly. I had never felt fear like that because I knew the person was standing inches away from where I was lying, and they knew I was in there pretending to be asleep. I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911. But before I hit call, I heard the bathroom window rattle. It was a tiny frosted window above the toilet. Then I heard something even worse. The sound of the room next to mine opening, like an actual key or tool working the lock, and then the door opening. The room next to me had been empty when I checked in. I knew that because I had looked through the crack in the curtains the night before and never saw a car or lights there. I got out of bed and crouched near the wall that connected our rooms. I heard movement next door. Not the heavy footsteps of somebody checking into a room. More like somebody trying not to make a sound. I called 911 and whispered everything as quietly as I could. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay on the line. While I was talking, I heard one hard hit on the shared wall behind the headboard, like someone testing how solid it was. Then another lower down, and then just nothing. I was trying so hard to listen that I could hear my own breathing and heartbeat. Then I heard the bathroom window in my room start to move. It wasn't rattling this time, it was opening, but just a little. I ran to the bathroom and shoved it closed with both hands. Something on the other side pushed back once. Not that hard, but enough for me to feel it. I locked it, even though the latch looked flimsy as hell, and then I backed away. The dispatcher told me officers were 2 minutes out. I could hear movement outside my front door now too, like there was more than one person. Then came the soft knocks on the door, like the night before. I didn't answer. At that point, I grabbed the motel chair and jammed it under the doorknob, even though I knew that probably wouldn't do much. The police arrived maybe a minute later, but it felt like 10. As soon as headlights hit the curtains, I heard running. It was at least 2 sets of footsteps. The officers found that the screen on my bedroom window had been removed and was lying in the bushes. They also found fresh pry marks on my truck door and on the door of the empty room next to mine. What I didn't find out until later was the worst part. The older officer from that morning came back and asked me privately if I had anyone angry at me or if I had posted online that I was staying there. I said no. Then he told me they had seen the green pickup before. According to him, there had been 2 other incidents in the previous 6 months involving men staying alone at that same motel for work. In both cases, someone had tried getting into their vehicles during the night. One guy said he heard people outside his room, but left before reporting anything else. The other one woke up to his motel door cracked open, even though he swore he had locked it. Nothing had been taken in either case. The officer said they believed the group was following out-of-town men from bars or work sites, then waiting until they were isolated and trying to get inside their rooms. He never said exactly what he thought the end goal was, but he didn't need to. I packed my stuff while 2 officers stood outside. When I checked under the bed before leaving, which I normally never do anywhere, there was a folded piece of paper shoved almost against the wall. I only noticed it because I dropped my phone charger. It was part of a local newspaper torn into a square, and on the back, somebody had written my room number and my truck plate in pen. That meant whoever it was hadn't just picked me at random that night. They had been watching long enough to write things down. I left the motel before 1 in the morning and drove almost 2 hours home, even though I had 1 more day of work scheduled. My company sent someone else the next week, and I found out later he stayed in a different town. Besides my recounting of this story just now, I really tried to just put this experience behind me. This story started in October 2025. I was single and decided to download Tinder to see if I could find a potential partner. After a few swipes, I got a match. "Killian liked you back," it said. I started smiling and opened with, "Hey, what's up?" He responded quickly, and we started talking all day, every day. He was in the military at a base not too far away from where I lived. Eventually, after a few weeks of talking, he became possessive over me. He would say things like, "You're mine. If I can't have you, no one can. And if you block or unfriend me, I'll kill you," along with other threats. Keep in mind, we never even started dating. One day in December, he just unfriended me on Snapchat, and I didn't think too much of it. I moved on and kept living my life, until a few days ago when he added me again. Remembering the threats, I decided to add him back so he wouldn't do anything. He sent a snap that said, "I've been thinking about your beautiful smile for 8 weeks now. I keep thinking about what we could be if I didn't let my dark thoughts win." I responded with, "That's cute," not wanting to piss him off. We started talking again, and I responded mostly out of fear over what he might do if I didn't. He was acting like a possessive boyfriend, always asking where I was and who I was with. He kept asking me to turn on my Snap map so he could make sure I was safe. I didn't want to because he freaked me out. Thursday last week, I was driving around with my friend until about 1 a.m. I asked if he could drop me off at home, which he did. We said our goodbyes, and I walked up the alleyway to my house. Keep in mind, I never gave him my address. I saw a man standing there and didn't think much of it until he called my name. I didn't know who he was, so I responded, Yes, who's asking?" Then I saw his face. I felt my heart skip a beat. I started cold sweating. I felt panic in my body and started shaking. He then grabbed my neck with his hand and slammed my head hard into the wall and started studying my face. He kept saying things like, "Who were you with?" and "Why are you out this late? Was it a man?" I just stood there completely terrified. This entire time, he was choking me so hard, I had literal tears in my eyes and was gasping for air. I genuinely thought he was going to kill me. He kept choking harder until he eventually threw me to the ground head first. I whimpered from the pain and gasped for air as he let go of my throat. I looked him in the eyes and saw nothing. There were no emotions there. He didn't feel bad at all. All of a sudden, he sat on top of me and slapped me hard across the face. I put my hand where he hit me as tears filled my eyes again. Then he started choking me again. This time I was more sure that he was going to kill me. I looked up at the black sky and started thinking about my deceased dog. I even started smiling as I felt myself about to pass out. Then he suddenly let go of my throat. He said, "Fuck, I have to go. The last bus is leaving in 3 minutes." Then he ran away while I lay on the cold, wet ground trying to catch my breath. I was in shock and didn't know what to do. I decided to call my best friend and try to tell him what happened, but I couldn't talk. My vocal cords had been choked so badly I couldn't make a sound. My best friend only heard strange noises and said he was on his way. When I got to my friend's house, I fell asleep on the couch within 3 minutes because I was exhausted. While I was sleeping, My friend called the police and told them the situation. The next day, my friend drove me to the police station to give my statement, and I did. After I had been questioned, the police decided my life was in too much danger to just let me go without protection. I was given an alarm device, a tracking device with multiple buttons that would immediately alert the police of my location so they could save me, because we all knew he would come back. 3 days ago, I was followed by a friend of Killian. If the plan hadn't been for me to be picked up by a friend nearby, I don't think I would be here to tell this story. The police told me Killian's intention was to kill me, so if he had his own car or if there had been a later bus, I would probably be dead. Every time I leave the house or go outside, I fear he's watching, which he's told me he'll always be. One day I might not see him coming, and he might be waiting in that dark alleyway again, and I might not trigger the alarm fast enough. I'm not safe, and I just wanted to share this story in case I do end up getting killed. Be careful, everyone. I never even gave him my info to find me. My name is Mike, and this happened last October when I decided to take a solo camping trip in the Smoky Mountains. I had been feeling burnt out from work and just wanted a couple quiet days away from everything. I had done solo trips before and never had any issues, so this didn't feel like a big deal at the time. I left early in the morning, and the drive took most of the day. A couple hours before reaching the park, I stopped at a small roadside diner because I was getting hungry, and I knew food options would be limited once I got deeper into the mountains. The place was pretty empty, just a few older people drinking coffee and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there forever. I sat at the counter and ordered a burger and fries. While I was eating, I noticed a man sitting a few stools down from me. He wasn't doing anything strange exactly, but he kept glancing in my direction without really turning his head. I remember thinking he probably just noticed I wasn't local. At one point, he asked where I was headed, and I told him I was going camping up in the mountains. He just nodded and said to be careful out there. I asked what he meant, and he just shrugged and said it gets real quiet out there at night. I didn't think too much into that and just paid the bill and left. By late afternoon, I reached the area where I planned to park. It was just a dirt pull-off near a trailhead with no other cars around. That should have maybe been my first sign to pick somewhere else, but I liked the idea of being alone. I grabbed my backpack and gear and started hiking in. The trail wasn't too hard, but it took longer than I expected, and I started realizing I was going to be setting up camp close to dark. I eventually found a small clearing that looked good enough. It was flat and had enough space for my tent and a small fire. I rushed to get everything set up before it got too dark. By the time I finished setting up the tent, the light was already fading, and the woods were getting that gray color they get right before night. I gathered some sticks and got a small fire going. Sitting by that fire actually felt nice at first. I made some s'mores and just listened to the normal sounds you'd expect in the woods, like bugs and wind through the trees. After maybe half an hour, I heard something that didn't match the other sounds. It was the sound of footsteps on leaves. Surely human footsteps. I looked up and saw a man standing maybe 30 or 40 feet away between the trees. He was standing there just facing me. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the low light, but I could tell he was watching me. I called out, asking if he was all right. He stepped a little closer into the edge of the firelight and said hello. Just that one word, nothing else. I asked if he was camping nearby, and he deflected my question with another question, asking if I was out there alone. That question made my stomach drop a little. I hesitated before answering, and then told him no, that my friends were meeting me soon. That was a complete lie. I hadn't brought anything to defend myself, and I figured sounding like I wasn't alone was the smartest move I had. He just nodded slowly, like he accepted that answer. Then he turned around and started walking back into the woods without another word. I watched him the whole time. As he got farther away, he started blending into the darkness between the trees. Right before he disappeared completely, he stopped and turned back toward my fire. He just stood there again, facing me. I got the feeling he didn't think I could still see him, but I could barely make out his outline. He stood there for what felt like several minutes. I didn't want him to know I was watching, so I pretended to look down at my phone. My whole body felt tense, and I didn't feel safe going into my tent while he was still out there. Eventually, I looked back up, and he was gone. I stayed sitting by the fire another 20 to 30 minutes trying to listen for any more movement. I didn't hear anything else, but I didn't feel relaxed anymore. I finally put the fire out and got into my tent. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting and that he was probably just another camper who was curious. I laid there trying to fall asleep, but I don't think I ever fully relaxed. About an hour later, I heard footsteps again. This time they were much closer. I could hear them slowly moving around my campsite, leaves crunching in a circle around my tent. Then they stopped right outside. Everything went completely silent. I held my breath without even realizing I was doing it. I didn't know if someone was standing right outside the thin fabric of my tent or if I was just imagining it. But then I heard the sound of a man exhaling right outside. It wasn't loud, just a slow breath like someone standing still. And I don't mean that he was trying to make me hear it. I think I was just so hyper-focused that I heard something I usually wouldn't hear. Every instinct I had told me not to move or make a sound. I was afraid that if he knew I was awake, he might do something. So I just stayed completely still, pretending to be asleep. After God knows how long, I heard the footsteps slowly move away again. I waited a long time before even letting myself breathe normally. About 10 minutes later, the footsteps came back. It was the same circling around the tent. Then he stopped again, and then the same silence. This went on for hours. Sometimes the steps would fade off into the distance and I would think he finally left. Then they would come back again. Either he was walking away and returning, or he was standing somewhere in the trees just watching and coming closer whenever he felt like it. I never heard any talking, but something about the way the steps sounded made me feel like it wasn't just one person anymore. I can't explain why. Maybe it was just fear messing with my head. At one point, I noticed the inside of my tent starting to get lighter. I realized the sun was starting to come up, and that I'd been awake the entire night. As soon as there was enough light, I decided I was leaving. I didn't even bother eating. I just started stuffing things into my bag as fast as I could. My hands were shaking the whole time. When I finally unzipped my tent and stepped out, I immediately heard multiple sets of footsteps running off into the woods. Not just one, several. I couldn't see anyone, but I could clearly hear the sound of more than one person moving away through the leaves fast. That was the moment I knew I hadn't imagined anything. I didn't even finish packing properly. I just grabbed what I could carry and started jogging back toward the trail. I kept expecting to hear someone following me, but I didn't. I reached my car, I locked the doors, and I just sat there trying to calm down. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke up hours later with the sun high in the sky. Part of me tried to rationalize everything, like maybe it was just a couple other campers messing with me. I even considered going back to get the rest of my stuff since I had left some gear behind in my rush. It was full daylight now, and I figured whatever happened at night wouldn't happen during the day, so I walked back down the trail. When I got to where I was certain my campsite had been, I stopped completely. My tent was gone. My sleeping bag was gone. The small cooking supplies I left were gone. Every last thing was gone. The only thing left was the black circle of ashes from my fire. I walked around the area thinking maybe I had the wrong spot, but I knew I didn't. The trees and rocks were exactly how I remembered. Someone had taken everything. I didn't see any trash or damage, just empty ground like I had never been there. I didn't look around any longer. I just turned around and walked straight back to my car. I didn't report it or try to find my stuff. I just wanted to get out of there. Losing the gear didn't matter to me anymore. The only thing that mattered was leaving without getting hurt. I drove straight home that day, and I haven't gone camping alone since. Sometimes I still think about how many people were actually out there that night, and how close they were standing to me while I pretended to sleep.